Picture this. It's 4 billion years ago. A sleek vessel, constructed from materials we couldn't even name, descends through the poisonous atmosphere of a planet that doesn't yet have a name. The crew, if you can call them that, aren't human. They won't be human for billions of years. They're something else entirely. Something ancient. Something with a mission. Below them stretches a world of such hostility that it will kill a modern human in seconds. The sky glows orange-red with volcanic fury. Oceans boil under an atmosphere thick with methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. Meteorites the size of mountains rain down from space every few thousand years. This is Earth, but not as we know it. And yet, these visitors didn't come here by accident. They came because this hellish, violent, primordial world had something they needed, something they'd been searching for across the vastness of space. They came because Earth, despite being a cauldron of chaos, had the perfect conditions for an experiment that would change the fate of the universe itself. What did they find when they arrived? What did they do? And most disturbingly, are we the result of their intervention, or did something far stranger happen on that ancient day? For the next few hours, we're going to explore the most radical, most scientifically grounded, and most mind-bending theory about the origin of life on Earth, the possibility that life didn't begin here at all, that we and every living thing on this planet are the descendants of an ancient cosmic seeding. Welcome to the untold story of Panspermia, alien visitors, and the hidden origins of life on Earth. The world before life. Let's start by understanding exactly what these hypothetical visitors would have encountered. Because the Earth of 4 billion years ago, during what geologists call the Hadean Eon, was literally a world from hell. The name itself comes from Hades, the ancient Greek underworld, and it's absolutely fitting. Imagine standing on the surface of this ancient Earth, if you somehow could. The first thing that would kill you is the atmosphere. There's almost no oxygen, perhaps 0.0001% compared to the 21% we breathe today. Instead, the air is a toxic cocktail of water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and volcanic gases, including sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. The greenhouse effect is extreme, keeping surface temperatures somewhere between 80 and 230 degrees Celsius, far hotter than any desert on modern Earth. The sky itself would look alien to us. Without an ozone layer, the sun's ultraviolet radiation pours down unfiltered, sterilizing any exposed surface with deadly efficiency. But you wouldn't see the sun clearly anyway. The atmosphere is thick with volcanic ash and debris, creating a perpetual twilight, punctuated by the red glow of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of active volcanoes scattered across the surface. The landscape is hellish and constantly changing. Massive volcanic eruptions reshape entire continents in days. Lava flows stretch for hundreds of kilometers. The ground itself heaves and cracks as the young Earth's interior, far hotter than today, drives violent tectonic activity. Mountain ranges rise and fall within thousands of years, a blink of an eye in geological time. The late heavy bombardment. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Hadean Earth is the constant bombardment from space. This period, which lasted from about 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago, is known as the Late Heavy Bombardment. During this time, Our inner solar system was essentially a cosmic shooting gallery, with asteroids and comets left over from the formation of the planets still careening through space, colliding with everything in their path. These weren't small meteorites. Some of these impactors were hundreds of kilometers across, dwarf planets in their own right. When they struck Earth, they released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons. The largest impacts would have vaporized entire oceans, turning the planet's surface into a globe of molten rock and steam. Any life that existed before such impacts would have been instantly sterilized. Scientists estimate that during the late heavy bombardment, Earth was hit by more than 17,000 asteroids larger than 10 kilometers across. For perspective, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago was only about 10 kilometers in diameter, and it caused a global extinction event. Now multiply that devastation by 17,000, with many of those impacts being far larger. Some researchers have calculated that the most massive impacts during this period would have vaporized the top 100 meters of the oceans, raising global temperatures to the boiling point of water for thousands of years. These events, called impact frustration events, would have repeatedly sterilized the planet's surface, making the emergence of life seem not just difficult, but virtually impossible. The water mystery. And yet, despite this apocalyptic scenario, something remarkable was happening on Hadean Earth. There was water. Lots of it. By 4 billion years ago, Earth had already developed its first oceans, though they were nothing like the life-filled seas of today. The origin of Earth's water is itself one of the great mysteries of planetary science. Our planet formed in the inner solar system, relatively close to the Sun, where it was hot enough that water should have been vaporized. So where did all the water come from? The leading theory is that much of it was delivered by comets and water-rich asteroids during the late heavy bombardment itself. These icy impactors, originating from the outer solar system where water could exist as ice, brought their precious cargo to our dry, young world. In a sense, the same bombardment that made the surface hellish was also delivering the essential ingredient for life. But here's where things get interesting for our Panspermia theory. Those comets and asteroids weren't just bringing water. They were bringing something else: organic molecules. Complex carbon-based compounds formed in the cold depths of space. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. Nucleobases, the letters of the genetic code. Lipids, which could form primitive cell membranes. Analysis of meteorites that fall to Earth today, pristine samples of the ancient material that built our solar system, reveals that they're loaded with these organic compounds. The Murchison meteorite, which fell in Australia in 1969, contained more than 70 different amino acids, including many that living organisms use. These weren't contaminants from Earth. Their isotopic signatures proved they formed in space. The impossible timeline. This brings us to one of the most puzzling aspects of life's origins, what scientists call the impossible timeline. According to our best evidence, life emerged on Earth astonishingly quickly after the planet became even remotely habitable. The oldest confirmed evidence of life on Earth comes from fossilized microorganisms found in 3.5 billion-year-old rocks in Western Australia. But there are hints, controversial but increasingly accepted, that life may have existed even earlier. Some researchers claim to have found evidence of biological activity in rocks from Greenland dated to 3.7 billion years ago. Even more controversial are findings suggesting life might have existed 4.1 billion years ago, barely 400 million years after Earth itself formed. Think about that timeline. Earth spent hundreds of millions of years being pounded by massive asteroids, with its surface repeatedly sterilized by impacts that vaporized the oceans. The window of opportunity for life to emerge was incredibly narrow, and yet it seems to have happened almost immediately, as soon as conditions became remotely favorable. This is where scientists begin to raise their eyebrows. The jump from non-living chemistry to living cells is extraordinarily complex. Even the simplest modern bacteria contain thousands of genes, sophisticated protein machinery, a genetic code, and cellular structures of bewildering complexity. For this to evolve from scratch, through random chemical processes, in just a few 100 million years, on a planet being regularly sterilized by impacts, seems almost impossibly lucky. Unless, of course, life didn't start from scratch on Earth at all. The Goldilocks catastrophe. Here's what makes early Earth both perfect and terrible for life. The very conditions that made it hellish also made it chemically active. The volcanic activity pumped out gases and minerals. The impacts delivered organic compounds and water. The heat provided energy for chemical reactions. The UV radiation, while deadly to complex life, could have powered the synthesis of organic molecules. Some scientists call this the Goldilocks catastrophe. Earth was simultaneously too hot, too violent, and too unstable for life, and yet somehow just right for the chemistry that life requires. It's as if the planet was a chemical reactor being stirred violently, with ingredients being added constantly from space. But here's the question that keeps astrobiologists awake at night. Was this chemical reactor following a recipe? Did life emerge through blind chance? Or was there something, or someone, who saw in this hellish world exactly what they needed? Because if you were an advanced civilization capable of interstellar travel, and you wanted to seed life on a barren planet, you wouldn't choose a peaceful, stable world. You'd choose a world exactly like Hadean Earth, violent, chemically active, with liquid water, abundant energy, and the raw materials necessary for life. You'd choose a world that could take your microscopic cargo and give it the energy and conditions needed to take root and evolve. So when our hypothetical aliens descended through that toxic atmosphere 4 billion years ago, what were they looking for? And more importantly, what did they leave behind? The answer to those questions will challenge everything we think we know about our place in the universe. The theory that won't die. The idea that life came from space sounds like pure science fiction. It conjures images of flying saucers and little green men depositing primordial soup on a lifeless Earth. But the scientific theory of panspermia, the notion that life, or the seeds of life, can travel between planets and even between star systems, has a surprisingly respectable pedigree. The term panspermia comes from the Greek words pan, all, and sperma, seed, and it literally means seeds everywhere. The basic idea is simple. Life didn't originate on Earth through chemical evolution here. Instead, the building blocks of life, or perhaps even simple living organisms, came from somewhere else in the universe. This isn't a fringe theory cooked up by conspiracy theorists. some of the greatest minds in science have seriously considered panspermia, including Nobel Prize winners and renowned physicists. And as our understanding of both the hardiness of life and the dynamics of the solar system has grown, panspermia has gone from being dismissed as impossible to being recognized as not just possible, but perhaps even likely under certain conditions. The historical journey. The idea has ancient roots. The Greek philosopher Anaxagoras, in the 5th century BCE, proposed that the seeds of life existed throughout the universe. But panspermia as a serious scientific hypothesis really began in the 19th century. In 1871, Lord Kelvin, one of the most respected physicists of his era, suggested that life might have been brought to Earth on meteorites from other planets. He wrote, "We must regard it as probable in the highest degree that there are countless seed-bearing meteoric stones moving about through space." This wasn't idle speculation. Kelvin was responding to growing evidence that meteorites could survive the violent entry into Earth's atmosphere, while potentially harboring organic material inside. The hypothesis was further developed by Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius in 1903. Arrhenius, who would win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1903, proposed a mechanism he called radiopanspermia. His idea was elegant. Bacterial spores could be blown off the surface of one planet by radiation pressure from its star, drift through space, and eventually land on another planet, potentially seeding it with life. Arrhenius calculated that a spore-sized particle could be accelerated by starlight to speeds that would allow it to cross interstellar space within thousands or millions of years. He even suggested that life might have originated on one planet and then spread throughout the galaxy by this natural process, making life potentially ubiquitous in the universe. The modern revival. For much of the 20th century, panspermia was considered an interesting but unlikely hypothesis. The main objection was simple: space is deadly. The vacuum of space, the extreme cold, the intense radiation, the lack of nutrients and water. How could any living thing possibly survive the journey between worlds, let alone between star systems? But then we started finding extremophiles. These are organisms that live in conditions previously thought incompatible with life. We discovered bacteria living in the superheated water of deep-sea hydrothermal vents, where temperatures exceed 120 degrees Celsius. We found microorganisms thriving in the frozen wastes of Antarctica, where temperatures drop below -50 degrees Celsius. We discovered bacteria living in rock kilometers beneath Earth's surface, and others surviving in the intensely radioactive environment of nuclear reactor cooling tanks. Most remarkably, we began testing organisms in space itself. Experiments aboard the International Space Station and other spacecraft have exposed bacteria, fungi, and even tiny animals called tardigrades to the vacuum of space. Some survived for months or even years. Tardigrades, those microscopic water bears that look like 8-legged gummy bears under a microscope, can survive not just the vacuum of space, but also temperatures from near absolute zero to above boiling, radiation doses that would kill a human 1,000 times over, and years without food or water. These discoveries fundamentally changed the panspermia equation. If life could survive space conditions, then the interplanetary or even interstellar transfer of organisms suddenly seemed possible, not just theoretical. The three types of panspermia. Modern panspermia theory actually comes in several flavors, ranging from the nearly certain to the highly speculative. Understanding these different versions is crucial to evaluating which scenarios might apply to Earth's origins. Lithopanspermia is the most scientifically accepted form. This is the idea that rocks ejected from one planet by asteroid or comet impacts can carry microorganisms to other planets. Here's how it works. A massive impact on Mars, for example, blasts rocks off the surface with such violence that some achieve escape velocity. These rocks, potentially harboring hardy microbes protected deep within crevices, then drift through space for thousands or millions of years until they encounter another planet, say Earth, and fall to the surface as meteorites. This isn't just theoretical. We've found dozens of meteorites on Earth that came from Mars, blasted off the red planet by impacts, and eventually captured by Earth's gravity. Analysis of some of these Martian meteorites suggests that they never got hot enough during their ejection or landing to sterilize any organisms that might have been inside. The famous ALH 84001 meteorite, found in Antarctica, even contained structures that some scientists argued looked like fossilized bacteria, though this interpretation remains controversial. The beauty of lithopanspermia is that it doesn't require anything unusual, just the normal processes of impacts, orbital mechanics, and the surprising toughness of life. Many scientists now consider it virtually certain that Earth and Mars have been exchanging biological material for billions of years. If Mars ever developed life, it's quite possible that we're all Martians, descendants of hardy bacteria that survived the trip. Radiopanspermia, Arrhenius's original idea, is more speculative. This requires that individual organisms or spores be pushed through space by radiation pressure alone, without the protection of a rock. The challenges are severe. Exposure to unshielded cosmic radiation, the vacuum of space, and potentially millions of years of transit time. While we now know some organisms can survive these conditions for limited periods, crossing interstellar distances via radiation pressure seems extremely unlikely for complex organisms. However, there's a fascinating twist. Some researchers have suggested that DNA itself, or even simpler self-replicating molecules, might survive such journeys better than complete organisms. DNA is remarkably stable, especially in the cold and dry environment of space. Perhaps what travels between the stars isn't living cells, but the information, the genetic code, that other chemicals on the destination planet could read and use to bootstrap life. Directed panspermia is the most controversial, and the most relevant to our opening scenario. This is the idea that an advanced civilization might deliberately seed other planets with life. It was proposed seriously by Francis Crick. Yes, the same Francis Crick who co-discovered the structure of DNA and won a Nobel Prize for it, and his colleague Leslie Orgel in 1973. Crick and Orgel weren't proposing this as science fiction. They argued that if life takes a very long time to evolve from chemistry, and if the universe is older than any individual planet's habitable lifetime, then the only way to explain life on a young planet like Earth might be that it was deliberately transported from an older world. They imagined an advanced civilization creating a payload of freeze-dried microorganisms representing their world's genetic diversity, loading it into an unmanned spacecraft, and sending it to potentially habitable planets across the galaxy. The mathematical problem of abiogenesis. To understand why serious scientists would consider directed panspermia, we need to grapple with what's called the origin of life problem, or abiogenesis, the process by which life arises naturally from non-living matter. Here's the challenge. Life, even in its simplest form, is staggeringly complex. A typical bacterium contains about 4 million base pairs of DNA, encoding roughly 4,000 genes. These genes direct the production of proteins, which are themselves chains of amino acids folded into precise three-dimensional shapes. The bacterium has a cell membrane made of lipids, internal structures for energy production, molecular machines for copying DNA and making proteins, and systems for sensing and responding to its environment. For life to emerge from non-life, you need all these systems to arise and start working together. It's not enough to have amino acids floating in a primordial soup. You need them to link together into proteins with specific sequences. You need those proteins to fold correctly. You need them to somehow develop catalytic activity, the ability to speed up chemical reactions. You need the genetic code to emerge, linking specific sequences of nucleotides in DNA or RNA to specific amino acids in proteins. You need cell membranes to form, creating a boundary between inside and outside. And all of this has to happen spontaneously, through random chemistry, in conditions that would destroy most of these delicate molecules as fast as they formed. Some scientists have calculated the odds of a single functional protein of even modest length, say 150 amino acids, arising by chance. The numbers are astronomical. For a specific sequence, you're looking at 20 to the 150 possibilities. That's a number with nearly 200 digits. Yes, not every sequence has to be exactly right, and natural selection can refine things once you have something that works even a little bit. But you need that first spark, that first self-replicating molecule that can start the process of evolution. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist Fred Hoyle famously compared the random emergence of life to a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 747. While most biologists think Hoyle was being too pessimistic because life evolved incrementally, not all at once, the basic problem remains. The step from chemistry to biology seems to require either extraordinary luck or a lot more time than Earth's early history allowed. The Earth as bottleneck argument. This is where panspermia becomes attractive from a purely logical standpoint. If life emerging from non-life is an extraordinarily improbable event, not impossible, but requiring perhaps billions of years of chemical experimentation across countless environments, then the fact that life appeared on Earth so quickly after the planet became habitable is suspicious. Think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to solve an incredibly difficult puzzle, one that typically takes 10 hours to complete. You start working on it, and to your amazement, you solve it in 10 minutes. There are 3 possible explanations. 1. You got incredibly, preposterously lucky. 2. The puzzle wasn't actually as hard as everyone thought. Or 3. Someone else had already worked on the puzzle before you got it, and you're just finishing the last few pieces.
Earth's rapid appearance of life is like that suspiciously quick puzzle solution. Either we got incredibly lucky, or abiogenesis is much easier than we think. Or, life didn't actually start from scratch here. It arrived already evolved from somewhere else, where there had been billions of years to solve the puzzle. If panspermia is correct, then Earth wasn't the cradle of life. It was a nursery that received infants from elsewhere. Those infants might have been simple bacteria, or even simpler, self-replicating molecules. that had already solved the hardest part of the origin of life problem on another world. They arrived on the hellish young Earth, found conditions suitable for survival and replication, and began the evolutionary journey that would eventually lead to every living thing we see today. The Fermi connection. There's another reason why directed panspermia appeals to some scientists, and it connects to one of the deepest mysteries in astronomy: the Fermi paradox. This is the apparent contradiction between the high probability that extraterrestrial civilizations should exist in our galaxy and the complete lack of evidence that they do. The galaxy is 13.6 billion years old. The Sun is only 4.6 billion years old, meaning there were 9 billion years of stellar and planetary evolution before our solar system even formed. If life emerges readily, and if some fraction of life evolves intelligence, and if some fraction of intelligent life develops technology, then there should be civilizations in the Milky Way that are millions or even billions of years ahead of us technologically. What would such a civilization do? One possibility: they would ensure their legacy by seeding the galaxy with life. Think about it from their perspective. Their own world might be dying. Their sun might be approaching the end of its life. Or they might simply feel a philosophical imperative to spread life throughout the cosmos. If you had the technology for interstellar travel, why wouldn't you send probes to every potentially habitable world, carrying the gift of life? This is where our opening scenario stops being pure fiction and starts being a scientifically defensible hypothesis. An advanced civilization, scouting the young galaxy for suitable worlds, arrives at a hellish but promising planet. They find a world with liquid water, abundant chemical energy, and the raw materials for life. They might not expect complex life to evolve quickly here, but they know that if they seed this world with hardy microorganisms, those organisms will have billions of years to evolve and diversify. They're not creating a colony. They're not expecting to be worshipped as gods. They're simply doing what life itself does: spreading, exploring, ensuring that the flame of existence continues burning in as many places as possible. Could that be what happened 4 billion years ago? Could we be the descendants of an ancient gift from a civilization now long gone? To answer that, we need to look at the evidence. Engineering the perfect seed. If an advanced civilization wanted to seed life on other worlds, what would they bring? This isn't just science fiction speculation. It's a question that serious scientists have considered, because the answer tells us what to look for in Earth's biological history. The cargo wouldn't be puppies and oak trees. It wouldn't even be complex organisms like insects or fish. Instead, the ideal package would be microscopic, incredibly hardy, and carrying the maximum amount of genetic diversity in the minimum amount of space. We're talking about microorganisms, bacteria and archaea, but not just any microorganisms. We're talking about extremophiles, specifically engineered or selected for their ability to survive space travel and bootstrap life on a harsh, primordial planet. Let's think about the specifications for this cosmic cargo. First, radiation resistance. Space is flooded with cosmic rays, high-energy particles from exploding stars and active galactic nuclei that can shred DNA and destroy cellular machinery. An organism designed for panspermia would need extraordinary DNA repair mechanisms, perhaps multiple redundant copies of its genome, and protective pigments or proteins to shield its genetic material. Remarkably, we have organisms on Earth that fit this description. Deinococcus radiodurans, known as Conan the bacterium, can survive radiation doses 3,000 times higher than would kill a human. It can withstand 5,000 gray of radiation without loss of viability, enough to reduce an unprotected human to molecular chaos in seconds. It achieves this through multiple copies of its genome and incredibly efficient DNA repair enzymes that can rebuild its shattered genetic code from fragments. Second, desiccation tolerance. There's no liquid water in space. Any living cargo would need to survive in a completely dried state, perhaps for millions of years. Again, Earth has organisms that can do this. Certain bacteria form endospores, dormant, incredibly tough cell states that can survive without water for decades, possibly centuries. Bacillus species have been revived from endospores found in 250-million-year-old salt crystals, though this claim is controversial. Even if the true survival time is only thousands or millions of years, that's more than enough for interplanetary transfer. Third, temperature extremes. Space is cold, about 2.7 Kelvin, or minus 270 degrees Celsius. But during atmospheric entry, temperatures can exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius. The ideal Panspermia organism would need to survive both extremes. Tardigrades can enter a state called cryptobiosis, where they replace most of their cellular water with protective proteins and sugars, allowing them to survive temperatures from minus 272 degrees Celsius to 150 degrees Celsius. Some bacterial endospores can survive even more extreme heat. Fourth, genetic diversity. Here's where it gets interesting. If you wanted to give a seeded world the best chance of evolving complex life, you wouldn't send just one species. You'd send a library, a collection of organisms representing the fundamental branches of life, carrying between them the genetic toolkit for all the biochemical processes life would need. This is where our hypothesis makes a testable prediction. If life was seeded on Earth from elsewhere, we might expect to see certain genetic capabilities appearing fully formed in the earliest life, rather than evolving gradually from simpler precursors. The universal genetic code mystery. Let's talk about one of the most puzzling aspects of terrestrial life. The genetic code is nearly universal. From bacteria to blue whales, from sequoias to humans, almost all life on Earth uses the same code to translate DNA sequences into proteins. There are 64 possible three-letter codons, sequences of 3 DNA or RNA bases, and with only minor variations, all life assigns them to the same 20 amino acids in the same way. Why is this remarkable? Because the genetic code is, in many ways, arbitrary. Laboratory experiments have shown that life could theoretically use many different genetic codes. In fact, scientists have created synthetic organisms with expanded genetic codes that work just fine. And yet, life on Earth settled on one code and stuck with it for at least 3.5 billion years. The standard explanation is common ancestry. All life on Earth uses the same code because all life descended from a single ancestor that happened to evolve this particular code, and changing it later would be catastrophic, like trying to change the programming language of an operating system while it's running. But here's the puzzle. The genetic code appears to be optimized in ways that seem unlikely to arise by chance. The arrangement of codons minimizes the impact of mutations. Similar codons code for chemically similar amino acids, so a single letter mutation is likely to result in only a small change to the resulting protein, rather than a catastrophic one. Statistical analysis suggests that the genetic code we use is in the top 1% of possible codes in terms of error minimization. Some scientists see this as evidence of evolution's power to optimize even fundamental systems. But others see something more intriguing. What if the genetic code wasn't evolved on Earth at all? What if it was brought here, already refined through billions of years of evolution, on another world? If our hypothetical alien seeders had themselves evolved over vast timescales, their genetic code would have been optimized through eons of natural selection. When they seeded Earth, they would have brought that pre-optimized code with them. The last universal common ancestor. When scientists trace the evolutionary relationships between all known organisms on Earth, they find that everything points back to a single ancestral organism, called Luca, the last universal common ancestor. This wasn't the first living thing, but it was the ancestor of everything alive today. Everything that evolved before Luca either went extinct or left no descendants. By analyzing which genes are shared across all domains of life, scientists can reconstruct what Luca must have been like. And here's where things get weird. Luca was already complex. Astonishingly complex. Luca had several hundred genes, a sophisticated metabolism, the ability to make proteins and copy DNA, and cell membranes. It used ATP, adenosine triphosphate, for energy, the same molecular battery that powers your muscles right now as you listen to this. It had ribosomes, molecular machines made of RNA and protein that manufacture proteins according to genetic instructions. These ribosomes are among the most complex molecular structures known, and they're essentially identical in all living things. Think about that. The common ancestor of all life on Earth, living roughly 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, already possessed molecular machinery of staggering sophistication. Between the formation of Earth 4.5 billion years ago and the appearance of Luca perhaps a billion years later, something or someone assembled all this complexity. The standard view is that there must have been an entire history of simpler organisms before Luca, a long chain of evolution from the first self-replicating molecules to increasingly sophisticated cells. But we have no direct evidence of these precursor organisms. The earliest definitive fossils show relatively complex cells. There's a gap, a crucial period where we can't see what was happening. Panspermia offers an explanation for this gap. Maybe much of that evolutionary history didn't happen on Earth. Maybe it happened on another world, over billions of years, and what arrived on Earth was not the beginning of life, but an already evolved, tested, optimized biological system ready to take root on a new world. The RNA world hypothesis. One of the leading theories for how life originated is the RNA world hypothesis. This proposes that before DNA and proteins, there was a simpler time when RNA, the molecular cousin of DNA, served as both genetic material and catalyst for chemical reactions. RNA can store information like DNA, but it can also fold into complex shapes that allow it to catalyze reactions like proteins. In theory, you could have an RNA molecule that copies itself, making it the first self-replicating entity, the first glimmer of life. From these self-replicating RNA molecules, the story goes, more complex systems evolved. Proteins took over most catalytic functions because they're better at it. DNA took over information storage because it's more stable. And RNA became the messenger between them. It's a beautiful theory, and there's good evidence for it. Ribosomes, those protein-making machines found in all cells, are built around a core of RNA. The most crucial catalytic functions in the ribosome are performed by RNA, not protein, suggesting that these are molecular fossils from the RNA world. Cells also use RNA molecules called ribozymes that act as enzymes, and scientists have created self-replicating RNA molecules in the lab, proving the concept works. But, and this is a crucial but, the jump from simple self-replicating RNA to anything resembling a modern cell is enormous. You need membranes to form, creating a boundary between self and environment. You need metabolism to develop, allowing the protocell to generate energy. You need the genetic code to emerge, linking RNA sequences to amino acid sequences. And all of this needs to happen before you get to LUCA. If this all happened on Earth in less than 1 billion years, it represents the most rapid and improbable burst of evolution in the history of the universe. If it happened elsewhere, over 8 or 10 billion years, and then arrived on Earth as a mature system, the timeline becomes much more plausible. The building blocks from space. Here's an indisputable fact. The raw materials for life are everywhere in the universe. We find organic molecules, compounds containing carbon, in molecular clouds, on asteroids, on comets, on Mars, on Saturn's moon Titan, and in meteorites. The Murchison meteorite, which landed in Australia in 1969, has been studied intensively for decades. It contains more than 70 amino acids, including all the ones that life uses, plus dozens that terrestrial life doesn't use. It contains nucleobases, the letters of the genetic code. It contains fatty acids that can spontaneously form membrane-like structures in water. It contains sugars, including ribose, the sugar that makes up the backbone of RNA. More recently, scientists have found even more complex organic molecules in space.
The Rosetta spacecraft, which rendezvoused with a comet, detected glycine, an amino acid, in the coma around the comet's nucleus. Radio telescopes have detected complex organic molecules in interstellar space, including polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, ringed carbon structures that might have been important for early life. This means that if our hypothetical alien seeders wanted to give life on Earth a boost, they wouldn't have needed to bring just living organisms. They could have brought a carefully designed mixture of organic compounds, a primordial soup concentrate that, when released into Earth's oceans, would jumpstart the chemical evolution that leads to life. Imagine their payload: freeze-dried bacteria, sealed in radiation-shielded containers, ready to spring back to life when exposed to liquid water. Alongside them, vials of carefully synthesized organic molecules, amino acids, nucleobases, lipids, maybe even short chains of RNA or protoproteins. The organisms would be the seeds, yes, but the organic compounds would be the fertilizer, dramatically increasing the chances that life would take root and flourish. When their craft descended through that Hadean atmosphere, when it released its cargo into the toxic but chemically rich oceans of early Earth, it would have been delivering billions of years of evolution in a single moment. The bacteria would seek out hydrothermal vents, places where chemical energy could fuel their metabolism. The organic molecules would spread through the oceans, available for the bacteria to incorporate, or to self-assemble into protocells that could then take up bacterial genes through horizontal gene transfer. The directed evolution scenario. But let's push the hypothesis further.
What if the visitors didn't just drop off cargo and leave? What if they stayed, monitoring their experiment, perhaps for thousands or millions of years? An advanced civilization with the technology for interstellar travel would almost certainly have sophisticated biotechnology. They could engineer organisms specifically for different niches on the young Earth. Heat-loving thermophiles for the volcanic vents, salt-tolerant halophiles for the hypersaline pools, radiation-resistant polyextremophiles for the UV-blasted surface. They might have used directed evolution, a technique we use today in biotechnology where you force organisms to evolve rapidly by repeatedly exposing them to challenges and selecting survivors. They could have tested countless organisms, finding which ones thrived in Hadean conditions and which failed. The successful ones would be released into the environment. The failures would be studied to understand what went wrong. This isn't colonization in the way we usually imagine it. They're not building cities or terraforming the planet. They're working at the microscopic level, seeding and cultivating microbial ecosystems that will, over geological time, transform the planet into something capable of supporting complex life. Why would they do this? Perhaps because their own world was dying, and they wanted to ensure their biological heritage, if not their species, then at least their genetic code, their fundamental biochemistry, would survive somewhere in the universe. Perhaps they had discovered dozens or hundreds of young planets, and they seeded them all, knowing that only a few would succeed, but that those few would become gardens of unimaginable diversity. Or perhaps the reason was simpler and more profound. Because they could. Because the urge to create, to nurture, to spread the gift of life across the cosmos was as fundamental to their nature as it is to ours when we plant a garden or protect an endangered species. If this happened, if Earth was deliberately seeded with life 4 billion years ago, would we be able to tell? Would there be evidence? The answer is yes, and some of that evidence might be hiding in plain sight, written in the very molecules of our cells. The code within the code. In 2013, two scientists, Vladimir Sherbak and Maxim Makukov from the Fesenkov Astrophysical Institute in Kazakhstan, published one of the most provocative papers in the history of molecular biology. They claim to have found a signal embedded in the genetic code itself, a pattern so consistent across all life on Earth that it couldn't be the result of chance or natural evolution. Their argument was mathematical and complex, but the core idea was startling. When you analyze the genetic code using information theory and look at specific mathematical relationships between the numerical values assigned to amino acids and nucleotides, you find patterns that resemble what mathematicians call an arithmetical code. Specifically, they found patterns in the redundancy of the genetic code, the fact that multiple different codons can code for the same amino acid, that seem to follow precise mathematical rules. They proposed that this represented a deliberate signature, like a watermark in a document or a serial number etched into a manufactured product. Their conclusion: once fixed, the code might stay unchanged over cosmological timescales. In fact, it is the most durable construct known. Therefore, it represents an exceptional storage for an intelligent signature. The code appears that it was invented outside the solar system already several billions years ago. In other words, they argued that our DNA contains a message from the civilization that created or modified the first life forms, a message that has been copied faithfully through every generation of every organism for billions of years. Now, let's be clear. This paper was and remains highly controversial. Most geneticists and evolutionary biologists reject these claims, arguing that the patterns Scherbak and Makukov identified could arise through natural selection, the genetic code being optimized over time for error minimization and efficiency. The fact that the genetic code shows certain mathematical regularities, they argue, is a testament to evolution's power to optimize, not evidence of intelligent design. But let's examine the possibility seriously, because even if Scherbak and Makukov's specific claims are wrong, the broader question they raised is profound. Could there be a signature of panspermia hidden in our biology? If so, what would it look like? And where would we find it? The homochirality mystery. One of the deepest mysteries in biochemistry is called homochirality, and it might hold clues to life's origins. Here's the puzzle. Many molecules, including amino acids and sugars, come in two mirror image forms called enantiomers. They have the same chemical formula and the same atoms connected in the same way, but they're mirror images of each other, like your left and right hands. We call these left-handed and right-handed versions. In chemistry lab, when you synthesize these molecules, you get a 50-50 mixture of both forms, a racemic mixture. This is what we find in meteorites and in interstellar space. Amino acids exist in equal amounts of left-handed and right-handed versions. But here's the stunning fact. All life on Earth uses only left-handed amino acids in proteins, and only right-handed sugars in DNA and RNA. Why? There's no obvious chemical reason. Both forms work equally well in laboratory experiments. An organism could, theoretically, build proteins from right-handed amino acids, or store its genetic information in DNA made with left-handed sugars. And yet every living thing on Earth, from bacteria to humans, from mushrooms to maple trees, uses the same handedness. This is exactly what you'd expect if all life descended from a common ancestor that just happened to use left-handed amino acids. And once that choice was made, it became frozen into biology. Trying to switch handedness would be like trying to convert a city from driving on the right side of the road to the left side. Theoretically possible, but practically impossible while the system is operating. But here's the mystery. How did the first life choose? In a prebiotic soup with equal amounts of both forms, how did life become homochiral? This is known as the origin of homochirality problem, and despite decades of research, we don't have a definitive answer. Several theories exist. Maybe certain mineral surfaces in early Earth preferentially bound one form over the other, concentrating it. Maybe circularly polarized light from space, which does favor one-handedness slightly, provided the initial imbalance. Maybe it was just random chance. In one tiny pool somewhere, there happened to be slightly more left-handed amino acids, and that's where life started. Or, and this is where panspermia enters the picture, Maybe life didn't become homochiral on Earth at all. Maybe it arrived already homochiral, having undergone that selection on another world billions of years earlier. If the visitors brought organisms that already used left-handed amino acids, then every organism descended from their seeds would use the same handedness, not because Earth chemistry favored it, but because that's what the seed organisms brought with them. There's even a test for this. If we ever find life on another world that evolved completely independently of Earth life, and it also uses left-handed amino acids, that would be extraordinary evidence for panspermia. It would suggest that something in the fundamental physics or chemistry of the universe favors left-handedness, or that life originated in one place and spread throughout the galaxy, carrying its chirality with it. The viral vector hypothesis. Here's a scenario that could explain both the rapid emergence of life on Earth and some of the puzzling features of our genetics. What if the aliens didn't bring bacteria, but viruses? Viruses are strange entities living on the border between life and non-life. They're essentially genetic information wrapped in a protein coat. They can't reproduce on their own. They need to hijack the cellular machinery of a host organism to make copies of themselves. But they're also incredibly efficient at storing and transmitting genetic information, and they can transfer genes between completely different species in a process called horizontal gene transfer. Modern cells are full of sequences that clearly came from ancient viral infections. Huge portions of the human genome, some estimates say more than 8%, consist of remnants of retroviruses that infected our ancestors millions of years ago. These viral sequences have been copied along with our own genes through countless generations, permanent passengers in our genetic material. Now imagine this. The alien seeders arrive at early Earth and find not a completely lifeless world, but one where simple self-replicating molecules, perhaps RNA molecules, have already emerged through natural chemical processes. These proto-life forms are primitive, barely alive, without the sophisticated cellular machinery needed to evolve into anything complex. The visitors don't need to replace these proto-organisms. Instead, they release engineered viruses, genetic packages containing the crucial genes needed for more advanced life. Genes for efficient protein synthesis, genes for sophisticated DNA replication, genes for metabolic pathways that can harvest energy from the environment more effectively, genes for DNA repair that will allow organisms to survive in harsh conditions. These viral packages infect the primitive protocells, inserting their genetic cargo. Some infections fail. The protocells aren't compatible, but some succeed. And suddenly, these simple protocells gain access to billions of years of evolved genetic sophistication. They become the ancestors of Luca, the last universal common ancestor. This scenario elegantly explains several puzzles. 1. The genetic complexity of early life. Luca already had sophisticated genes because they were delivered via viral vector, not evolved from scratch on Earth. 2. The universality of core biochemical processes. All life uses the same basic genetic code, the same protein synthesis machinery, the same metabolic pathways, because all life inherited them from the same viral delivery system. 3. The presence of virus-like elements in all cells. The fact that all organisms have genetic elements that resemble viruses might be remnants of the original delivery mechanism. 4. The rapid emergence of life. The hard problem of going from chemistry to biology was largely solved elsewhere.
Earth just needed to provide the environment for these delivered genes to flourish. The bacterial spore time capsule. Let's return to a more conservative panspermia scenario. The visitors brought bacterial spores, the most resilient form of microbial life. If they did, what would we expect to see in Earth's biological history? First, we'd expect to see multiple separate origin events for different domains of life. And remarkably, this might be exactly what we see. Life on Earth is divided into 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, which includes all complex life: plants, animals, fungi, and protists. For many years, scientists assumed these 3 domains shared a common ancestor. But recent genetic analyses have raised puzzling questions about how different bacteria and archaea really are at the fundamental level. Their cell membranes are completely different. Bacterial membranes are made with ester lipids. Archaeal membranes use ether lipids. This isn't a small difference. It's a fundamental distinction in chemical structure.
The proteins they use to copy DNA and synthesize proteins are also surprisingly different. More different than you'd expect if they diverged from a recent common ancestor. Some scientists have suggested that bacteria and archaea might have originated separately and then exchanged genes later through horizontal gene transfer. If true, this could support a panspermia scenario. The visitors seeded Earth with both bacterial and archaeal organisms, knowing that the genetic diversity would increase the chances of success in the unpredictable Hadean environment. Each domain would have brought different metabolic capabilities. Bacteria might have been better at photosynthesis and breaking down organic compounds. Archaea might have been better at surviving in extreme conditions: high heat, high salinity, extreme pH. Together, they could colonize a wider range of environments than either domain alone. And here's a testable prediction. If bacteria and archaea were indeed separate deliveries, their most ancient genes, the ones they don't share, should show different levels of optimization for Earth's conditions. Genes that both domains share, presumably swapped through horizontal gene transfer after arrival, should be more Earth-optimized than unique genes in each domain, which might still carry signatures of adaptation to their original world's conditions. The tungsten anomaly. There's a peculiar geochemical observation that might, just might, hint at off-Earth origins for life. Early life on Earth, including some modern bacteria and archaea, uses certain enzymes that require tungsten, a heavy, rare metal that today is mostly locked away deep in Earth's core. But 4 billion years ago, during the Hadean and early Archean eons, geological conditions were different. Some scientists have argued that tungsten would have been more available at Earth's surface than it is today. This would explain why some ancient metabolic pathways use tungsten-containing enzymes. However, there's a puzzle. The tungsten-based enzymes in modern organisms are remarkably sophisticated for such ancient systems. They're highly evolved, highly optimized catalysts. Could such sophistication really develop in the narrow window when tungsten was available on early Earth? A speculative but fascinating alternative. What if these tungsten-based enzymes evolved on a different world? One where tungsten was more abundant than on Earth. When life was seeded on Earth, it brought these tungsten-based metabolic pathways with it. They worked well enough in the Hadean environment to survive. And as Earth's surface tungsten became scarcer, evolution slowly replaced some tungsten enzymes with alternatives based on more abundant metals like molybdenum. But some tungsten-based enzymes were so sophisticated, so well integrated into core metabolism, that they couldn't be replaced. They persist to this day, molecular fossils of life on another world with a different geochemistry than Earth's. This is highly speculative, of course, but it illustrates how careful biochemical detective work might potentially reveal chemical signatures of life's off-Earth origins. The horizontal gene transfer highway. One of the most important discoveries in molecular biology over the past few decades is that genes don't just pass vertically from parent to offspring. They also jump horizontally between organisms, even between completely different species. Bacteria are especially promiscuous in their genetic exchanges, picking up genes from their environment, from viruses, and from each other. In early life, horizontal gene transfer would have been even more common. The tree of life would have been less like a tree and more like a web, with genes flowing freely between primitive organisms, mixing and matching capabilities. If alien microorganisms arrived on Earth and encountered indigenous proto-life that had emerged naturally through Earth's own chemistry, horizontal gene transfer would have blurred the lines between the two origins. The alien genes, sophisticated, highly evolved, giving major advantages to any organism that acquired them, would have spread through the protobiosphere like wildfire. Within a few million years, you'd have a thoroughly mixed population. Organisms with some genes from the alien seed organisms and some from Earth's own proto-life. Trying to identify which genes came from where would be nearly impossible billions of years later, because natural selection would have optimized everything for Earth conditions, erasing the original signatures. But perhaps not entirely. If we could identify genes that appear too sophisticated for their apparent age, genes that show signs of having been under selective pressure for longer than Earth has existed, those might be candidates for alien import. Similarly, genes that seem poorly optimized for Earth biochemistry, that only make sense in a different chemical environment, might be clues. This is the frontier of paleoastrobiology, using genetic archaeology to search for signs of life's cosmic origins. It's extraordinarily difficult because billions of years of evolution have buried any original signals under layers of mutation and natural selection. But it's not impossible. The synthetic option. Let's consider one more scenario, perhaps the most unsettling. What if life on Earth isn't descended from natural organisms at all, alien or otherwise, but was instead entirely synthetic, designed and engineered from scratch by advanced beings? We're already developing the capability to create artificial life. In 2010, scientists led by Craig Venter created a bacterial cell with a completely synthetic genome. They designed the DNA sequence on computers, synthesized it chemically, and inserted it into a bacterial cell whose original DNA had been removed. The cell came to life and began dividing, controlled entirely by the synthetic genome. We're primitive at this, compared to a civilization millions of years ahead of us. What could they create? Perhaps organisms designed from first principles, optimized not by the slow process of natural selection, but by intelligent design. Organisms with genetic codes designed for maximum efficiency. Metabolisms designed for maximum energy extraction. Cellular machinery designed for maximum reliability. If Earth's life originated this way, there might be subtle clues. Perhaps certain genetic or biochemical features that are too perfect, that show a level of optimization beyond what random evolution typically achieves. Perhaps genes that appear designed for modularity and ease of modification, like well-written computer code. Perhaps standardized parts that appear across all domains of life, but that seem unlikely to be the product of independent evolution. Some scientists have even suggested that certain features of the genetic code look engineered. The systematic way the code is organized, the error-correcting properties, the efficiency of the translation machinery. These could be products of billions of years of evolution, or they could be the products of intelligent optimization by beings who understood molecular biology far better than we do. The truth is, we may never know for certain. 4 billion years is a long time for evidence to degrade, for signals to be buried under noise. But the questions remain, tantalizing and profound, written in the very molecules of our cells. The first 100 million years. Let's imagine the scenario is true. Alien visitors seeded Earth with microbial life 4 billion years ago. What happened next? How did their microscopic gift transform a hellish, lifeless world into the verdant planet we know today? The transformation wouldn't have been quick or dramatic. For the first 100 million years after seeding, Earth would have looked much the same to any observer. A volcanic wasteland, racked by massive impacts, with a toxic atmosphere and boiling seas. But at the microscopic level, everything was changing. The seeded organisms, whatever they were, had to survive first. This means they needed to find habitable niches in an otherwise hostile world. The most likely candidates would have been hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ocean floor where superheated water, rich in dissolved minerals and gases, gushes from Earth's interior. Modern hydrothermal vents support extraordinary ecosystems. Despite being kilometers below the ocean surface, in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, these vents are oases of life. Communities of bacteria and archaea thrive in the chemical-rich water, harvesting energy from compounds like hydrogen sulfide and methane. Larger organisms, tube worms, clams, crabs, depend on the microbes, either hosting them in their tissues or eating them directly. But in the Hadean, there would have been no animals, no tube worms, just the microbes, alone in the dark, processing chemicals and slowly, invisibly, beginning to change the planet. The metabolic revolution. The organisms released by the hypothetical seeders would have brought with them a vast library of metabolic capabilities, different ways of extracting energy from the environment. This diversity would have been crucial for colonizing the varied habitats of early Earth. Some organisms would have been chemolithotrophs, rock eaters essentially, gaining energy by oxidizing minerals like iron, sulfur, or hydrogen. Others might have been methanogens, producing methane as a waste product from their metabolism. Still others might have been acetogens, producing acetate, or hydrogen oxidizers, or any of the dozens of metabolic strategies that microbes employ today. This metabolic diversity would have allowed the seeded biosphere to spread rapidly. Within a few million years, microbial mats would have formed in favorable locations. Hot springs, tidal pools, the edges of hydrothermal vents. These mats, layered communities of different microbes, each performing different metabolic functions, would have been the planet's first visible ecosystems. We have fossils of such mats, called stromatolites, dating back at least 3.5 billion years. Some controversial findings suggest stromatolites might exist in rocks 3.7 or even 3.8 billion years old. These ancient structures look remarkably similar to stromatolites forming today in places like Shark Bay, Australia, living proof that microbial ecosystems have remained fundamentally similar for billions of years. But the real revolution wasn't in forming mats. It was in how these organisms were changing the chemistry of Earth itself. The Great Oxidation Event, planned or accident, one of the most dramatic events in Earth's history, was the Great Oxidation Event, which occurred around 2.4 billion years ago. Before this, Earth's atmosphere had almost no free oxygen. After it, oxygen levels rose to a few percent of atmospheric gases, not nearly as much as the 21% we have today, but a revolutionary change nonetheless. The Great Oxidation Event was caused by cyanobacteria, photosynthetic microbes that split water molecules, using the hydrogen to build organic compounds and releasing the oxygen as waste. Before cyanobacteria, photosynthesis existed, but it used different hydrogen sources, like hydrogen sulfide, which didn't produce oxygen. Oxygenic photosynthesis, the water-splitting kind, is extraordinarily complex. It requires a sophisticated molecular machine called photosystem II, which is one of the most intricate protein complexes known. Building this machine through random evolution would have taken enormous amounts of time and countless evolutionary experiments. Here's a disturbing question. What if oxygenic photosynthesis didn't evolve on Earth at all? What if it was one of the capabilities brought by the alien seeds, lying dormant for 1.5 billion years until cyanobacteria evolved the rest of the cellular machinery to use it effectively? Think about it from the perspective of advanced beings seeding a planet. You'd know that a planet with oxygen in its atmosphere has much greater potential for complex life. Oxygen is a powerful electron acceptor, allowing for far more efficient metabolism than anaerobic processes. With oxygen, organisms can extract much more energy from food, enabling larger body sizes, faster movement, and eventually, intelligence. But you couldn't release oxygen-producing organisms on a planet like Hadean Earth immediately. The atmosphere and oceans were full of reduced compounds, iron, sulfur, methane, that would instantly react with any oxygen, consuming it before it could accumulate. You'd need to wait until these reduced compounds were largely oxidized, until the planet's chemistry was ready for an oxygen atmosphere. So perhaps the seeded organisms included the genetic information for oxygenic photosynthesis, but it wasn't activated immediately. It remained dormant, passed down through countless generations, until environmental conditions were right. Then, around 2.4 billion years ago, in organisms whose other traits had been shaped by evolution on Earth for over 1 billion years, these ancient alien genes activated, and the Great Oxidation Event began. This is highly speculative, of course. The standard evolutionary explanation, that cyanobacteria evolved oxygenic photosynthesis through normal processes and then proliferated rapidly, is perfectly adequate. But the speculative version raises a fascinating possibility. The transformation of Earth might have been following a blueprint, a pre-planned succession of events encoded in the genomes of the seeded organisms.
The eukaryotic enigma. About 2 billion years ago, something unprecedented happened. The first eukaryotic cells appeared. Eukaryotes are the complex cells that make up all plants, animals, fungi, and many single-celled organisms. They're distinguished by having a nucleus to house their DNA, along with other specialized compartments called organelles. The origin of eukaryotes is one of the great mysteries of biology. The prevailing theory is endosymbiosis. A larger archaeal cell engulfed a smaller bacterial cell. But instead of digesting it, the two began living in symbiosis. The smaller cell became the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell, and the larger cell became the ancestor of all eukaryotes. This sounds simple, but it's actually extraordinarily complex. For endosymbiosis to succeed, hundreds of genetic and cellular systems had to be coordinated. The host cell had to develop mechanisms to transport proteins into the engulfed cell. The engulfed cell had to transfer most of its genes to the host cell's nucleus. The two organisms had to synchronize their reproduction, so they divided at the same time. Energy production had to be reorganized, so the host cell could benefit from the mitochondrian's metabolism. And somehow, all this happened only once. Despite billions of years of bacteria and archaea interacting, despite countless opportunities for similar symbioses to arise, complex eukaryotic cells evolved only once in Earth's entire history. Everything from mushrooms to humans descends from that single successful merger. Why only once? If it's a natural process that can arise through standard evolution, why didn't it happen repeatedly? The fact that it happened only once suggests either incredible luck or something else. From a Panspermia perspective, here's a possibility. What if eukaryotes didn't evolve through endosymbiosis at all? What if the alien seeds included both simple prokaryotic organisms, bacteria and archaea, and at least one eukaryotic organism? And what we see in the geological record is this complex organism finally proliferating widely enough to leave fossils. There's a problem with this idea. The genetic evidence strongly suggests that eukaryotes arose through a merger of bacterial and archaeal cells. Eukaryotic genomes contain genes that clearly came from both domains, and the mitochondria in our cells still have their own small genomes that are unquestionably bacterial in origin. But here's a compromise hypothesis. What if the capability for endosymbiosis, the specific cellular machinery needed to engulf and maintain a symbiotic bacterium, was part of the alien toolkit? What if the seeded organisms included genes that facilitated this process, making the impossible possible? In modern cells, endocytosis, the process of engulfing external material, requires sophisticated protein machinery. These proteins assemble into a molecular scaffold that bends the cell membrane inward, forming a pocket that pinches off into a vesicle inside the cell. This machinery exists only in eukaryotes. Prokaryotes can't do it. But if the seeded organisms included proto-eukaryotic cells with early versions of endocytic machinery, then endosymbiosis wouldn't be a random, once-in-a-billion-years accident. It would be a capability waiting to be activated, needing only the right environmental pressures and the right partner organisms to succeed.
This would explain both the genetic evidence eukaryotes really did arise from a merger of prokaryotes, and the incredible improbability of that merger happening through chance alone. The merger wasn't chance. It was enabled by molecular machinery brought from elsewhere. The Cambrian explosion. Too fast? Too sudden? Fast forward to 541 million years ago. The Cambrian explosion. In less than 20 million years, a blink of an eye in geological terms, almost all major animal body plans appeared in the fossil record. Before the Cambrian, life was mostly microscopic, or at best, simple and soft-bodied. After the Cambrian, we have trilobites with complex eyes, predators with grasping appendages, animals with hard shells and sophisticated nervous systems. The Cambrian explosion has puzzled biologists since Darwin's time. Darwin himself called it the greatest challenge to his theory of evolution, because it seemed to show life diversifying too quickly, with complex forms appearing seemingly from nowhere. Modern paleontology has softened this mystery somewhat. We now know there were animal ancestors before the Cambrian, including the enigmatic Ediacaran organisms. We understand that several environmental factors, rising oxygen levels, the evolution of predation, the development of hard body parts might have triggered a rapid burst of evolution. But it's still remarkably fast. Within 20 million years, evolution produced compound eyes, articulated limbs, segmented bodies, sophisticated nervous systems, and diverse feeding strategies. If you were designing life to colonize a planet, wouldn't you include the genetic toolkit for all these innovations, waiting for the right conditions to deploy them? This isn't suggesting that Cambrian animals were aliens, or even that they were unchanged from some original design. It's more subtle. Perhaps the genes underlying major innovations, the Hox genes that control body segmentation, the genes for eye development, the genes for neural networking, were part of the original seed, lying dormant or serving other functions for billions of years until they could be recombined and deployed for new purposes during the Cambrian. Modern developmental biology has discovered something astonishing. The genes that control major aspects of development are remarkably conserved across wildly different animals. The genes that tell a fly where to grow its eyes are essentially the same as the genes that tell a human where to grow eyes, despite the fact that fly eyes and human eyes work completely differently and evolved independently. This deep conservation of developmental genes has been called the genetic toolkit of development. All animals use variations on the same basic toolkit, mixing and matching the same fundamental genes in different combinations to produce different body plans. From an evolutionary perspective, this suggests that all animals inherited this toolkit from a common ancestor, which makes sense. But from a panspermia perspective, it raises the question, is this toolkit too sophisticated, too modular, too well-designed to have emerged through purely natural processes on a single planet's evolutionary timescale? The question of intelligence. Let's address the ultimate question. What about human intelligence? Could that have been part of the alien plan? The standard evolutionary story is well supported. Intelligence evolved gradually in our lineage over millions of years, driven by social complexity, tool use, and language. Our brains aren't qualitatively different from other mammalian brains. They're just larger and with expanded regions, particularly the cortex. But there are aspects of human cognition that continue to puzzle evolutionary psychologists. Our capacity for abstract mathematics, for instance,
seems far beyond what natural selection for survival on the African savanna should have produced. Evolution should give us just enough intelligence to find food, avoid predators, and reproduce.
Why can we understand quantum mechanics, compose symphonies, and contemplate the origin of the universe? The usual answer is that intelligence is generally useful. And once evolution got us to a certain level, that intelligence could be applied to anything, including things far removed from survival pressures. This is almost certainly correct. But humor me with one more speculative scenario. What if intelligence itself, the capacity for abstract thought, language, technological development, was always latent in the seeded genome? Not in the sense that aliens engineered humans specifically, but in the sense that the genetic mechanisms underlying neural complexity and cognitive flexibility were part of the original toolkit. Evolution on Earth would still have done all the work of actually building intelligent species. It would have taken billions of years of natural selection, countless dead ends and extinctions, and the right environmental pressures at the right times. But the underlying potential, the genetic raw material, might have come from elsewhere, from organisms that evolved on a world where intelligence emerged earlier, or from deliberate design by beings who wanted to ensure that at least some of their seeded worlds would eventually produce intelligent life. If true, this would mean we're not aliens, not artificial, not designed in any specific way. We're the product of natural evolution on Earth, shaped by our planet's unique history and environment. But we're evolution working with better raw materials than Earth's own chemistry could have produced, building on a foundation laid billions of years ago by visitors whose motives and nature we can only guess at. The transformation complete. Today, Earth is a living planet. Life has transformed it utterly. From the hellish world of the Hadean, the atmosphere is oxygen-rich, maintained by photosynthetic organisms. The oceans teem with life at every depth. The continents are covered with forests, grasslands, and tundra, each ecosystem an intricate web of organisms depending on each other. If the alien seeders returned today, they would find their experiment succeeded beyond measure. From their microscopic gift, or perhaps from the combination of their gift and Earth's own chemical experimentation, has emerged a biosphere of staggering diversity and complexity. But would they be pleased? Or would they look at us, with our technology and our impact on the planet, and wonder if they created something they didn't intend? That's a question for our final chapter. The archaeological challenge. If alien visitors really did seed Earth with life 4 billion years ago, finding evidence is perhaps the greatest archaeological challenge imaginable. We're looking for traces of an event that happened before most of Earth's rocks existed, in a period when the planet's surface was being constantly reshaped by volcanic activity and massive impacts. Most rocks from the Hadean Eon simply don't exist anymore. They've been subducted into Earth's mantle, melted, and recycled. The oldest intact rocks on Earth are about 4 billion years old. Jack Hill's zircons from Western Australia. These tiny crystals have survived because zircons are virtually indestructible, able to survive even the complete melting of the rocks that contain them. But zircons are just tiny mineral grains. They can tell us about temperatures and the presence of water on early Earth, but they can't preserve fossils or cellular structures.
For direct evidence of the visitors or their cargo, we need intact rock formations from the right period, and those are vanishingly rare. Still, the absence of direct evidence doesn't mean we're helpless. There are multiple lines of investigation that could, in principle, provide strong circumstantial evidence for panspermia. Let's explore them. The search for genetic anomalies.
The most promising avenue for finding evidence is in the genomes of living organisms. DNA is the ultimate archive, and every living thing carries within it a record of its evolutionary history stretching back billions of years. If life was seeded from elsewhere, there should be genetic signatures, patterns, or sequences that don't quite fit Earth's evolutionary history. The challenge is knowing what to look for and distinguishing genuine anomalies from the many strange patterns that arise naturally through evolution. Approach 1. Evolutionary rate anomalies. One method is to look for genes that appear too evolved for their age. By comparing similar genes across different organisms and measuring the differences, scientists can estimate how long ago those organisms shared a common ancestor. This is called molecular clock analysis. If a gene shows signs of having been under selective pressure for longer than Earth has been habitable, that would be suspicious. The gene would have more mutations than you'd expect given the time available, suggesting it evolved partially elsewhere, at a different rate, before being brought to Earth. The problem is that molecular clocks are imprecise and affected by many factors. Mutation rates vary. Natural selection can accelerate or slow change, and horizontal gene transfer can move genes between organisms in ways that confuse the analysis. Still, if we found multiple core genes across all domains of life that consistently appeared older than Earth's habitable history, that would be striking. Approach 2. Unnatural information density. Another approach is information theory. Some researchers have suggested analyzing the genetic code for patterns that indicate intelligent design rather than natural evolution. This was the basis of the Sherbak and Makakov paper mentioned earlier. The idea is that natural evolution, while it can produce complex and efficient systems, does so through gradual, incremental changes. Intelligent design might produce patterns that are mathematically elegant in ways that random evolution wouldn't necessarily achieve. Things like systematic redundancy, error-correcting codes, or numerical relationships that seem too precise to be coincidental. This is extraordinarily controversial, partly because it's used by creationists to argue against evolution, and partly because it's genuinely hard to distinguish too elegant to be natural from elegantly optimized by natural selection. But if done rigorously, looking for specific mathematical signatures that are characteristic of designed information systems, it might reveal anomalies. Approach 3. Xenobiological chemistry. A third genetic approach. Look for chemical signatures of non-Earth biochemistry. If the seeded organisms evolved on a world with different geochemistry than Earth, perhaps more abundant tungsten, or different ratios of isotopes, their biochemical machinery might show subtle preferences or adaptations for those conditions. For instance, certain enzymes might show unusual metal cofactor preferences, using metals that are rare on Earth when more common alternatives would work just as well. Or proteins might show isotopic fractionation patterns, preferences for certain isotopes of carbon, nitrogen, or sulfur that don't match what you'd expect from evolution in Earth's geochemical environment. This would require incredibly detailed biochemical analysis of the most ancient and conserved proteins across all life, but it's feasible with modern techniques. The artifact hunt. What if the visitors left behind physical artifacts, not necessarily high-tech equipment? That would have been destroyed long ago. But perhaps more durable markers, designed to survive geological timescales. Artificial isotope ratios. One way to create a nearly indestructible marker is to manipulate isotope ratios. Elements like carbon exist in multiple isotopes, carbon-12 and carbon-13, for instance.
In nature, these isotopes occur in predictable ratios. But an advanced civilization could isotopically enrich certain materials, creating substances with isotope ratios that couldn't occur naturally. If the visitors wanted to leave a marker that said, "We were here," they could create objects with impossible isotope ratios and bury them in stable geological formations. Even after billions of years, even if the objects themselves eroded away, the isotopic signature would remain in the surrounding rock. The challenge is distinguishing such signatures from natural processes, because some geological processes can also fractionate isotopes in unusual ways. But if we found multiple independent markers with the same anomalous isotope ratios in rocks from around 4 billion years ago, that would be compelling. The Lunar Archive. Here's a clever idea proposed by several scientists. If you wanted to leave a message that would survive for billions of years, you wouldn't leave it on a geologically active planet like Earth. You'd leave it on the Moon. The Moon has no plate tectonics, no erosion from water or wind, and only minimal bombardment by meteorites compared to the early solar system. Ancient surfaces on the Moon have been preserved essentially unchanged for billions of years. If the visitors left markers, bases, or even just deliberately arranged rocks on the Moon, those traces might still be there, waiting to be found. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Several scientists have seriously proposed searching for alien artifacts on the Moon. Not from 4 billion years ago necessarily, but from any time in Earth's past. The search would use high-resolution satellite imagery to look for geometric patterns, unusual albedo, reflectivity anomalies, or anything that doesn't fit natural lunar geology. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has photographed most of the Moon's surface at resolutions better than a meter per pixel. If there are large artifacts, we might have already photographed them without recognizing what they are. What we need is systematic analysis, perhaps using AI to flag anything unusual for human review. The ocean floor mystery. Earth's ocean floors are much younger than the continents, because seafloor is constantly being created at mid-ocean ridges and destroyed at subduction zones. The oldest seafloor is only about 200 million years old, far too young to preserve evidence of Hadean visitors. But there's an interesting possibility. Certain parts of the ocean floor, particularly near deep-sea vents, might have unusual geology that could preserve ancient materials. Some of the rocks brought up from the mantle at mid-ocean ridges are much older than the seafloor itself, and there are regions called oceanic plateaus, large igneous provinces on the seafloor that might preserve material from early Earth. If the visitors concentrated their seeding efforts around hydrothermal vents, the most obvious places for early life to thrive, and if any physical traces of their presence were incorporated into vent minerals, there's a tiny chance those minerals could be preserved in mantle rocks and later brought back to the surface. This would require extensive deep-sea exploration, drilling into oceanic plateaus and examining mantle rocks for any anomalous materials or structures. It's a long shot, but not impossible. The Mars connection.
If life was seeded on Earth, was Mars also seeded? The planet that might hold the clearest evidence of ancient panspermia isn't Earth at all. It's Mars. Mars had liquid water on its surface around the same time as early Earth, during the late Noachian period, about 3.7 to 4.1 billion years ago. If alien seeders visited our solar system, they would have seen two promising worlds, Earth and Mars. It would make sense to seed both, increasing the chances that at least one would succeed. But Mars's environment changed dramatically.
It lost most of its atmosphere. The surface froze, and any surface life would have been driven into extinction or forced underground. Unlike Earth, where life continued evolving and transforming the planet, Mars's biosphere, if it ever existed, would have been frozen in time. This means Mars might preserve a snapshot of early life as it was 4 billion years ago, before billions of years of evolution on Earth modified and optimized it for terrestrial conditions. If we find life on Mars, and if it shares fundamental characteristics with Earth life, the same genetic code, the same chirality, the same core biochemistry, that would be powerful evidence for common origin, either through panspermia or through exchange of material between the two planets via meteorites. Conversely, if we find life on Mars and it's completely different from Earth life, different genetic code, different chirality, different biochemistry, that would strongly suggest independent origins, which would argue against directed panspermia in our solar system. NASA's Perseverance rover is currently collecting samples from Mars that will hopefully be returned to Earth in the 2030s. Those samples might contain fossilized microorganisms, organic compounds, or chemical signatures of ancient life. Analyzing them could revolutionize our understanding of life's origins. The Interstellar Archaeology Program. The most ambitious search for evidence of ancient panspermia wouldn't focus on Earth at all, but on the galaxy itself. If an ancient civilization seeded multiple worlds, there might be patterns in the distribution of life that would betray their activities. Imagine an alien species with interstellar travel capability, existing perhaps 6 or 8 billion years ago when the galaxy was young. They send out seed ships to every star system with potentially habitable planets. Even if they only seed stars within a few hundred light-years of their home, that's thousands of star systems. Now, billions of years later, many of those seeded worlds might have evolved their own biospheres and possibly their own intelligent species. If we could detect biosignatures, signs of life, on exoplanets, we might notice suspicious patterns. For instance, if multiple worlds in the same region of the galaxy all show oxygen-rich atmospheres with similar chemical characteristics, that might suggest common origin through seeding. Or, if the isotopic ratios of atmospheric gases on multiple worlds cluster around values that don't match stellar nucleosynthesis predictions, that could indicate biological processes derived from the same source. We're decades away from having the technology to analyze exoplanet atmospheres in sufficient detail for this kind of analysis. But it's coming. The next generation of space telescopes will be able to detect not just the presence of atmospheres on Earth-sized exoplanets, but their chemical composition. Give us another few decades after that, and we might be able to measure isotope ratios in exoplanet atmospheres. If we ever develop interstellar probes, and there are serious proposals for laser-pushed light-sail craft that could reach nearby star systems within a human lifetime, we could directly sample exoplanet atmospheres, or even land on potentially life-bearing worlds, looking for signs of common,
biological ancestry. The SETI angle. Here's a fascinating possibility. What if the aliens who seeded Earth are still around, or left behind autonomous systems that are still operating? Traditional SETI. Search for extraterrestrial intelligence programs. Search for deliberate signals from alien civilizations. Radio transmissions. Laser pulses. Anything that looks like an attempt to communicate. But a seeding program might also involve monitoring systems. Satellites or probes that watch the seeded worlds, waiting for signs of intelligent life to emerge. If Earth was seeded, there might be a probe in our solar system right now, perhaps in a stable orbit around the Sun, waiting for signs that the seeding succeeded in producing intelligence. Once it detected our radio signals, our nuclear tests, or our space launches, it might have sent a report back to its creators, if they still exist, or activated a beacon to signal us. Some SETI researchers have proposed searching for lurker probes in the solar system, particularly in stable gravitational regions like Earth-Moon Lagrange points or the asteroid belt. These would be ancient, possibly non-functional artifacts, but if found, they could be analyzed for their technology and origins. There's also the possibility of a galactic message board, a repository of information left by the seeder civilization, telling us who they were, why they seeded Earth, and what happened to them. Such a message might be encoded in something stable and widespread, like the genome itself, which we've already discussed, or in physical markers placed in obvious locations. The late Carl Sagan proposed that if aliens wanted to leave a message for emerging intelligences, they might place it on a nearby, large, obviously interesting object, like the Moon. The Moon would be one of the first places any spacefaring civilization would explore, making it an ideal location for first contact information. The philosophical problem of proof. Here's the ultimate challenge. Even if we found strong evidence of panspermia, proving it to the satisfaction of the scientific community would be extraordinarily difficult. Science requires extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. And aliens seeded Earth with life 4 billion years ago is about as extraordinary as claims get. Any evidence we found would need to survive intense skepticism. Anomalous isotope ratios? Could be unknown geological processes. Genetic patterns that look designed. Could be natural selection optimizing in ways we don't fully understand. Artifacts on the Moon? Could be unusual natural formations or contamination from human missions. The burden of proof would be immense. We'd need multiple independent lines of evidence, all pointing to the same conclusion. We'd need to rule out every plausible natural explanation. We'd need the evidence to be repeatable and verifiable by independent researchers. But here's the thing. This is how science should work. Panspermia, especially directed panspermia, is a hypothesis that makes testable predictions. We can look for the evidence those predictions require. If we don't find it, the hypothesis is weakened. If we do find it and it survives scrutiny, then no matter how extraordinary the claim, we'd have to seriously consider it. Why it matters. You might wonder, does it really matter if life was seeded from elsewhere? Whether life arose naturally on Earth or was brought here, we're still the products of billions of years of evolution on this planet. Our biology, our ecology, our history, all of it is thoroughly terrestrial. Why does the origin story matter? It matters for several profound reasons. First, it changes our place in the cosmic story. If life arose independently on Earth, we might be rare, perhaps one of only a handful of life-bearing worlds in the galaxy. But if life was seeded, if there's a mechanism for spreading life across the cosmos, then life might be abundant. We might be part of a vast, interconnected web of biology spanning thousands of worlds, all descended from the same ancient source. Second, it affects our search for life elsewhere. If panspermia is common, we should expect to find life with similar biochemistry on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, possibly even on interstellar objects passing through our solar system. But if Earth's life is unique, finding anything alive elsewhere would mean discovering an independent origin of life, which would be even more profound. Third, it impacts how we think about our future. If we're the descendants of an ancient seeding, and if that seeding was successful in producing intelligence, then perhaps we have a responsibility to continue the cycle, to protect life on Earth, to spread it to other worlds, to ensure that the gift we received is passed forward. And finally, it touches on the deepest questions of existence. Are we alone? Are we special? Is there purpose in the universe, or are we just accidents of chemistry? If the answer to the panspermia hypothesis is yes, then we're not alone. We never were. We're part of something larger, something ancient, something that connects us to beings we'll never meet across gulfs of space and time that dwarf human comprehension. That's a thought worth contemplating under the stars. The identity crisis. Let's assume, for the remainder of this exploration, that the hypothesis is true. Earth was deliberately seeded with life by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization approximately 4 billion years ago. What would this mean for humanity's self-understanding? First, and most obviously, it would force a fundamental revision of our origin story. Every culture in human history has had creation myths, stories about where we came from and how life began. These myths serve psychological and social functions, giving people a sense of place in the universe and connecting them to something larger than themselves. The scientific origin story that emerged over the past few centuries, evolution by natural selection from simple chemical origins, replaced religious creation myths for many people, but it still provided a coherent narrative. We're the products of Earth's own creativity, shaped by our planet's unique history over billions of years. Panspermia doesn't negate evolution. We're still evolved beings, shaped by natural selection, carrying within us the history of our planet's changing environments. But it adds a layer. We're not purely terrestrial. Our deepest origins lie elsewhere, in a place we may never be able to identify, among beings we can scarcely imagine. For some, this would be profoundly unsettling. We'd be the descendants of an experiment, the result of someone else's actions, our entire biosphere a gift, or perhaps an imposition, from entities whose motives we don't understand. The spontaneity and natural wonder of life's emergence would be replaced by something more ambiguous, something intentional. For others, it would be exhilarating. We'd be confirmed as part of a cosmic community, connected to other worlds and other intelligences across the vastness of space and time. Our existence wouldn't be a lonely accident on a random rock, but part of a vast project, possibly connecting countless worlds across the galaxy. The creator question. The elephant in the room is obvious. If aliens seeded Earth with life, does that make them our creators? And if they're our creators, do we owe them something? Gratitude, worship, obedience? This is where careful thinking is essential. The seeders, if they existed, didn't create us. They created or brought simple microorganisms. Everything after that, the entire history of evolution on Earth, including the emergence of humans, happened through natural processes. We're not designed, we're evolved. Think of it this way. If you plant a garden, you're responsible for putting the seeds in the ground, but you're not responsible for the trillions of individual cell divisions, genetic mutations, and environmental interactions that turn those seeds into mature plants. The garden is still a product of natural processes. You just initiated those processes in a particular place. Similarly, if Earth was seeded, the seeders initiated life here, but they didn't control its subsequent evolution. They couldn't have predicted that humans would emerge, or elephants, or oak trees, or any specific organism. Evolution is contingent, depending on random mutations and unpredictable environmental changes. Run it again, and you'd get a completely different set of organisms. So the seeders, if they existed, might be thought of as gardeners rather than gods. They planted. Earth's evolution grew the garden into something they never could have predicted or planned. The Fermi Paradox Redux. If panspermia is real and widespread, it completely reframes the Fermi paradox. Remember, the paradox is the apparent contradiction between the high probability that intelligent civilizations should exist in the galaxy and the complete absence of evidence for them. If galaxy-spanning civilizations exist and engage in systematic panspermia, the paradox becomes even sharper. Why don't we see evidence of them everywhere? If they have the technology to travel between stars, why aren't they here now? Why do we seem to be alone? One possibility: the seeders are long gone. Perhaps their civilization existed billions of years ago, thrived for millions of years, seeded thousands of worlds, and then went extinct. Civilizations, even advanced ones, might not be immortal. Stars die. Planets become uninhabitable. Resources get depleted. Or perhaps intelligent species naturally self-destruct given enough time. If the Cedar civilization disappeared 3 billion years ago, there might be no trace of them left except their biological legacy. Life on countless worlds, all descendants of their ancient gift. Another possibility: they're still around, but practicing a philosophy of non-interference. Having seeded a world with the potential for intelligence, they step back and watch, never intervening, letting each seeded world develop on its own terms. We might be under observation right now by systems or beings that have orders never to reveal themselves until we reach some milestone, perhaps achieving interstellar travel ourselves, or solving our own societal and environmental problems. This is the zoo hypothesis, the idea that aliens are out there but are deliberately hiding from us because we're not ready for contact. It's unfalsifiable and somewhat patronizing. Who are they to decide when we're ready? But it would explain both widespread panspermia and our current isolation. A third possibility is the most profound. Perhaps advanced civilizations transcend physical existence entirely. Once a species reaches a certain level of technology, They might upload themselves into artificial systems, or manipulate space-time to exist in higher dimensions, or undergo some transformation we can't even conceive of. Before they transcend, they seed young worlds with life, ensuring that biological evolution continues even after they've moved beyond it. They're still around, in some sense, but in forms we can't detect or comprehend. The ethical inheritance. If we're the descendants of a deliberate seeding, do we inherit any moral obligations from that act? One argument says no. We didn't ask to be created or seeded, and we have no relationship with or debt to the entities that did it. We're free to chart our own course, make our own choices, and define our own values based on our own nature and circumstances. But there's another perspective. If someone gives you a gift, even if you didn't ask for it, you might feel some obligation to honor that gift by treating it well. If the gift is life itself, and if that gift required tremendous effort, crossing interstellar space, selecting the right worlds, carefully designing the optimal organisms, then perhaps we do have an obligation to survive, to thrive, and to carry forward the project of spreading and protecting life. This could manifest as planetary stewardship, an obligation to protect Earth's biosphere, the result of 4 billion years of evolution from the seeded beginning. Every extinction, every ecosystem we destroy, diminishes the diversity that emerged from that ancient gift. The seeding imperative, an obligation to eventually become seeders ourselves, spreading life to other worlds, continuing the cycle. If we receive this gift, perhaps we're meant to pass it forward, ensuring that life spreads as far as it can reach. The search for siblings, an obligation to search for other seeded worlds, other life that might share our ultimate origins. If we're part of a family spread across the stars, perhaps we should be actively trying to reconnect with our distant cousins. The preservation of knowledge, an obligation to understand and preserve the genetic and biochemical legacy of Earth's life, ensuring that the information accumulated over billions of years isn't lost, even if Earth itself eventually becomes uninhabitable. These aren't moral requirements in any absolute sense, but they're coherent ethical frameworks that might arise from accepting a panspermia origin. The question of purpose. One of the most challenging aspects of modern secular philosophy is the question of cosmic purpose. If we're just accidental products of mindless natural processes, is there any meaning to existence beyond what we create for ourselves? Panspermia doesn't fully answer this question. The seeders would themselves need to have come from somewhere, through some process. But it shifts the frame. If our existence is the result of intentional action by intelligent beings, then there was, at least at one point, purpose in our origins. But what was that purpose? Why seed other worlds? The survival hypothesis. The most pragmatic reason is species survival. If your world is dying, or your star is aging, you send out seed ships to preserve your biological legacy. Even if your civilization dies, the life you seeded continues, evolving new forms across countless worlds. The curiosity hypothesis. Perhaps the seeders were scientists or philosophers, curious about how life evolves under different conditions. Each seeded world is an experiment, a separate thread of evolution that will follow its own unique path. The seeders might return periodically to observe, or they might have left autonomous systems to record the results. The ethical imperative hypothesis. Maybe spreading life is simply the right thing to do, according to the Seeder's moral framework. If you can bring life to a lifeless world, if you can initiate the process that will eventually lead to consciousness and experience, perhaps you're obligated to do so. Life is rare and precious. Increasing the amount of life in the universe is inherently good. The legacy hypothesis. Closely related to survival, but more philosophical, the Seeders wanted to leave a legacy that would outlast them. Civilizations die, but the genetic and biochemical information they spread could persist for billions of years, influencing the evolution of life across the galaxy. In a sense, they achieved immortality through their biological descendants. The transcendence hypothesis. Perhaps the Seeders knew they were about to undergo some transformation, upload into machines, merge with a higher dimensional intelligence, or something even stranger. Before they transcended biological existence, they ensured that biological evolution would continue through seeding. We're the continuation of a process they themselves left behind. Which of these is true? If panspermia happened, we might never know. The motives of beings that existed billions of years ago, who might have been as far beyond us as we are beyond bacteria, would be fundamentally unknowable. But in a way, that uncertainty is liberating. We get to choose what our existence means. If we're the products of seeding, we can honor that origin by becoming the best versions of ourselves, by surviving, thriving, exploring, and eventually carrying life forward to other worlds.
Or we can choose to see ourselves as fully terrestrial beings, despite alien origins, defining our purpose based on our own nature and values, rather than any inherited obligation. The technology gap. If a civilization had the technology to seed Earth 4 billion years ago, what else could they do? Understanding the scope of their capabilities helps us appreciate how far beyond us they must have been. Interstellar travel is extraordinarily difficult. The distances are so vast that even traveling at significant fractions of light speed, it takes years or decades to reach even the nearest stars. The energy requirements are staggering. Accelerating even a small spacecraft to 10% of light speed requires energy equivalent to global human civilization's entire energy production for years, and that's just propulsion. The spacecraft also needs to survive interstellar space. Protection from radiation, micrometeorites traveling at relative velocities that make them as destructive as nuclear weapons, navigation across light years with extreme precision, and possibly hibernation or generation ship technology to keep crew alive for journeys lasting centuries. If the Seeders had this technology, what else did they have? They likely had complete mastery over genetics, able to read, write, and engineer DNA with the same ease we write computer code. They could design organisms from scratch, optimizing them for any environment. They likely had mature nanotechnology, able to manipulate matter at the molecular level, constructing machines and materials with atom-by-atom precision. They likely had artificial intelligence far beyond anything we can imagine, perhaps even artificial general intelligence that matched or exceeded biological intelligence. They might have had life extension or immortality technology, allowing individuals to survive long enough to complete interstellar missions. They might have had the ability to manipulate space-time itself, wormholes, warp drives, or other exotic physics that we can theorize about but not yet achieve. The gap between their technology and ours would be comparable to the gap between modern civilization
and Stone Age humans, or perhaps even larger. We wouldn't just be unable to comprehend their full capabilities. We might not even recognize their artifacts as technology if we found them. This has implications for the search for evidence. We're looking for traces of beings who might have been able to manipulate matter, energy, and possibly even space-time in ways we can barely conceive. Their markers might be all around us, but in forms we don't recognize, because we're not advanced enough to understand what we're seeing. The contact scenario. Let's imagine a scenario. Tomorrow, we receive a message. It comes from a probe in the outer solar system, silent for billions of years, activated by the detection of our radio signals. The message is simple, translated into hundreds of Earth languages. Greetings, descendants. You have achieved technological intelligence, fulfilling the promise of the seeding performed 3.9 billion years ago. You are one of 47 worlds where the seeding succeeded in producing intelligence. You are not alone. When you are ready to join the community of spacefaring intelligences, respond to this message. We will teach you what you need to know. How would humanity react? There would be joy, wonder, validation that we're part of something larger. But there would also be fear, uncertainty, and conflict. Different nations and cultures would disagree about whether to respond, when to respond, and what to say. Some would see this as humanity's greatest moment. Others would see it as a threat to human autonomy and independence. Religious groups would struggle to integrate this revelation with their belief systems. Some would embrace it, seeing the seeders as agents of divine will.
Others would reject it, calling it a deception or test of faith. Scientists would have a million questions. Where did the seeders come from? How did they achieve interstellar travel? What can they teach us? What do they want in return for contact? And beneath all of this would be a deeper existential question. If we accept contact, if we join this community of spacefaring intelligences, do we stop being fully human? Do we lose something essential about our nature, our independence, our ability to define ourselves on our own terms? There's no easy answer, but it's worth thinking about now, before the scenario becomes reality. Because if panspermia is true, the message might come someday. The ultimate question. At the end of all this speculation, we're left with the most profound question of all. Does it matter whether life was seeded by aliens or arose naturally on Earth? In terms of our daily lives, probably not. We're still human, still evolved, still facing the same challenges of survival, meaning, and morality that we'd face regardless of our ultimate origins. But in terms of our cosmic story, our place in the universe, and our future trajectory as a species, it matters enormously. The difference between being alone and being part of something larger, between being an accident and being part of a pattern, between being the first and being the heirs to something ancient. These differences shape how we see ourselves and what we aspire to become. If we're truly alone, if Earth's life arose entirely through natural processes, then we're pioneers, the first intelligence in our corner of the galaxy, with both the freedom and the burden of defining what intelligent life should do with the cosmos. If we're the descendants of ancient seeding, then we're inheritors, part of a tradition of life spreading that might encompass thousands of worlds and billions of years. We have a legacy to honor and a pattern to continue. Both possibilities are humbling. Both are awe-inspiring. Both give our existence meaning and purpose. And perhaps that's the real answer. Whether we're alone or part of something larger, whether we arose here
or descended from alien seeds, we're still remarkable. We're the universe becoming conscious of itself, asking questions about its own nature, reaching out to understand the cosmos and our place in it. That's true whether our origins lie in Earth's ancient oceans or in the depths of interstellar space. And it's a truth worth celebrating, whatever the evidence ultimately reveals. We've journeyed from the hellish surface of Hadean Earth to the frontiers of modern astrobiology, from the basic chemistry of life's building blocks to the profound philosophical questions of existence and purpose. We've explored one of the most radical, most speculative, yet scientifically defensible hypotheses about life's origins: that it didn't begin here at all, that our deepest roots lie elsewhere, that we're the descendants of an ancient cosmic gift. So what have we learned? Let's be clear about what's speculation and what's established science. What we know. Life appeared on Earth astonishingly quickly after the planet became habitable, possibly within just a few 100 million years. The building blocks of life, amino acids, nucleobases, lipids, exist in space and are delivered to planets via meteorites and comets. Some organisms can survive the extreme conditions of space for extended periods. The genetic code is nearly universal across all life on Earth and appears optimized in ways that might suggest billions of years of evolution. Mars probably had habitable conditions at the same time as early Earth. Interstellar travel, while extremely difficult, isn't physically impossible. The chemistry needed for life appears to be universal, built from the most common elements in the universe. What we suspect. Life might be relatively common in the universe, given how quickly it appeared on Earth. The transfer of life between planets in the same solar system, lithopanspermia, is probable. Complex life requires a long history of simpler life, and Earth's timeline seems compressed. The first organisms on Earth were already sophisticated, suggesting a long prior evolutionary history. What we're speculating. An advanced civilization deliberately seeded Earth with life 4 billion years ago. This civilization might have been motivated by survival, curiosity, ethics, or other unknowable reasons. Evidence of this seeding might exist in our DNA, in lunar artifacts, or in patterns across the galaxy. We might be one of many seeded worlds, part of a cosmic family we haven't yet contacted. The honest assessment is that we don't know. The evidence for directed panspermia is suggestive, but not conclusive. Every anomaly that might hint at alien intervention can also be explained by natural processes, given enough time and the right conditions. But here's what's remarkable. The hypothesis is testable. Unlike many questions about life's origins that disappear into the mists of deep time, panspermia makes specific predictions that we can actually investigate. We can search for genetic signatures that don't fit Earth's evolutionary timeline. We can look for artifacts on the Moon or in stable asteroid orbits. We can analyze Martian samples for signs of life related to Earth life. We can search for patterns in the distribution of life across the galaxy as our exoplanet detection capabilities improve. We can continue SETI, listening for messages from other intelligences that might share our origins. And even if we never find definitive proof, the search itself is valuable. It forces us to think deeply about life's nature, about our place in the cosmos, about the possibilities of intelligence and purpose in the universe. The humility of uncertainty. There's a temptation in narratives like this to come down firmly on one side or another, to declare that yes, we're definitely descended from alien seeds, or no, it's all natural and there's nothing mysterious about our origins. But the truth is more nuanced. Science thrives on uncertainty, on the tension between different explanations, on the humility of saying, we don't know yet, but we're learning more. Maybe life was seeded on Earth by aliens. Maybe it arose naturally through chemical evolution. Maybe it was a combination, some building blocks from space, some local chemistry, all mixing together in Earth's primordial environment to create something neither fully alien nor fully terrestrial. Any of these could be true. What matters is that we keep searching, keep questioning, keep pushing the boundaries of what we know. The wonder of either answer. Here's something I want you to take away from this exploration. Both answers, whether we're alone or we're seeded, are cause for wonder. If life arose naturally on Earth through purely chemical processes, that's extraordinary. It means the universe has within it the inherent tendency to create complexity, to organize matter into systems that can reproduce, adapt, and eventually think. It means we're the cosmos achieving consciousness through its own internal processes. No external intervention needed. We're self-created, self-directed, and completely, beautifully natural. If life was seeded by aliens, that's equally extraordinary. It means we're part of a story larger than ourselves, connected to beings and worlds we've never seen, carrying forward a legacy that stretches across billions of years and might span the galaxy. It means the universe isn't just capable of creating life once. It's capable of spreading it, nurturing it, ensuring it persists even as individual worlds and civilizations rise and fall. Both possibilities are humbling. Both give our existence meaning and context. Both suggest that life is precious, rare, and worth protecting. Our responsibility. Whether we're the products of chance or the descendants of deliberate seeding, we have the same responsibilities. We need to protect the biosphere that gave rise to us, or nurtured us. Every species that goes extinct, every ecosystem that collapses, diminishes the richness of life on Earth. Whether that life is 4 billion years of purely terrestrial evolution, or the flowering of an ancient cosmic seed, it's irreplaceable. We need to understand ourselves, not just our immediate history or our cultural development, but our deep biological origins, our place in the story of life on Earth, and possibly beyond. This understanding isn't just scientific curiosity. It shapes how we see ourselves and what we aspire to become. We need to look outward. Whether searching for signs of other life, exploring our solar system, or eventually venturing to other stars, we're compelled by our nature to explore, to seek, to understand. If we're alone, we're pioneers. If we're part of something larger, we're reconnecting with family. And perhaps most importantly, we need to preserve and spread life itself. Whether that's through protecting Earth's ecosystems establishing backup populations on other worlds, or eventually, perhaps millions of years in the future, becoming seeders ourselves. The mirror question. Here's a thought experiment to close with. Imagine humanity survives long enough to develop interstellar travel. We discover a young planet hostile but promising, with the right chemistry for life, but no life yet. We have the capability to seed it with carefully selected microorganisms that could, over billions of years, evolve into a rich biosphere. Would we do it? Should we do it? This isn't a hypothetical question we can dismiss. If we survive long enough, if we continue developing our technology and spreading through the solar system, we'll face this decision for real. And thinking about it now helps us understand the possible motives of any aliens who might have seeded Earth. Some would say yes, absolutely. Life is good, consciousness is good, and increasing the amount of life and consciousness in the universe is inherently valuable. We'd be giving a lifeless world the gift of biology, starting a process that might eventually produce experiences, thoughts, art, love, wonder. Others would say no, we have no right to impose our biochemistry on another world, to determine the trajectory of an entire planet's future. Who are we to play God, to make decisions that will echo across billions of years? Better to leave the world alone, let it follow its own course, whether that leads to life or remains barren. There's no easy answer, but if we're descendants of ancient seeders, then they faced this question and answered yes. They believed that spreading life was worthwhile, despite the moral ambiguity, despite not knowing how their seeds would evolve. Are they right? Are we grateful for existence even if it was imposed on us without our consent? Or would it have been better if Earth had remained lifeless, undisturbed, following only the blind chemistry of geology and atmosphere? I suspect most of us would say we're grateful to exist, despite the suffering and difficulty that comes with life. And if we're grateful, then perhaps the seeders, if they existed, made the right choice. The continuing story. The beauty of the Panspermia hypothesis is that the story isn't over. We're not looking at ancient history that's completely disconnected from our present. We're potentially looking at a story we're still part of, a process that's still unfolding. If Earth was seeded, the experiment is still running. We're the latest chapter in a story that began billions of years ago on another world, continued through the arrival of microorganisms on the young Earth, progressed through eons of evolution, and has now reached the point where the descendants have achieved intelligence and are asking questions about their origins. What comes next? Do we make contact with other seeded worlds? Do we find evidence of the seeders or their successors? Do we ourselves become seeders, carrying the gift forward to other young planets? Or does the story end with us? If we destroy ourselves through war, environmental collapse, or simple failure to expand beyond Earth before some cosmic catastrophe strikes. The hypothesis suggests we're part of something larger, but it doesn't guarantee success. Evolution is full of dead ends, of species that thrived for millions of years and then vanished. Trilobites dominated the oceans for 270 million years, longer than dinosaurs walked the earth, and then went extinct without descendants. We could be the same, a successful experiment that flourished for a brief moment in cosmic time, and then ended, leaving no trace except what's encoded in other organisms' genomes. Or we could be the breakthrough, the intelligence that survives, spreads, and carries the story forward for billions of years more. The choice, to whatever extent we have choice, is ours. The final wonder. Let me leave you with one last thought, one that applies whether panspermia is true or not. Right now, in your body, there are molecules, proteins, DNA, lipids, that are direct descendants of molecules that existed 4 billion years ago. Not copies of copies of copies, but continuous physical lineages. The DNA in your cells is a direct descendant of DNA in Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Some of your proteins use structures that were refined billions of years ago. You are ancient. You are connected through an unbroken chain of reproduction to the very first organisms on Earth, whether they arrived from space or emerged from terrestrial chemistry. Every cell in your body is operating using molecular machinery that has been tested and refined over incomprehensible spans of time. The ATP molecules powering your muscles right now are using the same chemistry that powered the first complex cells billions of years ago. The genetic code being read in your cells at this very moment is the same code that was read in microorganisms that lived when Earth had no oxygen, no continents as we know them, and no complex life. You are a living fossil, carrying within you the information and mechanisms of the deepest past. But you're also something entirely new, a configuration of matter and energy that has never existed before and will never exist again, asking questions that couldn't be asked until consciousness evolved. Whether you're the product of Earth's own creativity or the descendant of an ancient cosmic gift, you're remarkable. Your existence represents billions of years of successful survival, adaptation, and reproduction. You're the universe looking at itself, thinking about itself, wondering about its own origins. And that's true whether the answer to our title question is, the aliens found a promising hell planet and seeded it with life, or there were no aliens, just chemistry, time, and the inherent tendency of matter to organize itself into complexity. Both answers lead to the same conclusion. You're part of something vast, ancient, and ongoing. You're a link in a chain that stretches from the deep past into an unknown future. And what you do with your brief moment of consciousness, how you treat other life, what you create, what knowledge you pass on, how you engage with the mystery of existence, matters. The open question. So, what did the aliens find when they arrived 4 billion years ago? If they arrived at all, they found a world of potential, a hellish, violent, chemically rich environment where the seeds of life could take root and flourish. They found a world that, with the right nudge, could transform from a barren rock into a garden of unimaginable diversity. Or perhaps they never arrived at all, and the only seeding was the natural delivery of organic compounds via meteorites and comets, combined with Earth's own chemical creativity. The evidence is suggestive, but not conclusive. The questions remain open. The search continues. And in a way, that's perfect. The greatest mysteries should remain mysterious, at least for a while, giving us something to reach for, something to wonder about, something to drive our curiosity and our exploration. Maybe someday we'll know for certain. Maybe we'll find the probe on the moon, or decode the message in our DNA, or make contact with other intelligences descended from the same ancient seeds. Or maybe we'll conclusively prove that life arose naturally on Earth through well-understood chemical processes, and the mystery will be replaced by detailed understanding of exactly how chemistry became biology. Either way, the search itself is worthwhile, because in seeking to understand our origins, we're doing what life has always done: exploring, adapting, reaching beyond our current limits to understand more, to be more, to ensure that the flame of consciousness continues burning for as long as possible. Whether we're the gift or the accident, we're here, we're alive, we're thinking, wondering, searching, and that, ultimately, is what matters most. The story continues, and you're part of it. Epilogue. The search tomorrow. Life on Earth, and possibly beyond. This understanding isn't just scientific curiosity. It shapes how we see ourselves and what we aspire to become. We need to look outward, whether searching for signs of other life, exploring our solar system, or eventually venturing to other stars. We're compelled by our nature to explore, to seek, to understand. If we're alone, we're pioneers. If we're part of something larger, we're reconnecting with family. And perhaps most importantly, we need to preserve and spread life itself. Whether that's through protecting Earth's ecosystems, establishing backup populations on other worlds, or eventually, perhaps millions of years in the future, becoming seeders ourselves. The mirror question. Here's a thought experiment to close with. Imagine humanity survives long enough to develop interstellar travel. We discover a young planet, hostile but promising, with the right chemistry for life, but no life yet. We have the capability to seed it with carefully selected microorganisms that could, over billions of years, evolve into a rich biosphere. Would we do it? Should we do it? This isn't a hypothetical question we can dismiss. If we survive long enough, if we continue developing our technology and spreading through the solar system, we'll face this decision for real. And thinking about it now helps us understand the possible motives of any aliens who might have seeded Earth. Some would say, yes, absolutely, life is good, consciousness is good, and increasing the amount of life and consciousness in the universe is inherently valuable. We'd be giving a lifeless world the gift of biology, starting a process that might eventually produce experiences, thoughts, art, love, wonder. Others would say no. We have no right to impose our biochemistry on another world, to determine the trajectory of an entire planet's future. Who are we to play God, to make decisions that will echo across billions of years? Better to leave the world alone. Let it follow its own course, whether that leads to life or remains barren. There's no easy answer. But if we're descendants of ancient seeders, then they faced this question and answered yes. They believed that spreading life was worthwhile, despite the moral ambiguity, despite not knowing how their seeds would evolve. Are they right? Are we grateful for existence even if it was imposed on us without our consent? Or would it have been better if Earth had remained lifeless, undisturbed, following only the blind chemistry of geology and atmosphere. I suspect most of us would say we're grateful to exist, despite the suffering and difficulty that comes with life. And if we're grateful, then perhaps the Cedars, if they existed, made the right choice. The continuing story. The beauty of the panspermia hypothesis is that the story isn't over. We're not looking at ancient history that's completely disconnected from our present. We're potentially looking at a story we're still part of, a process that's still unfolding. If Earth was seeded, the experiment is still running. We're the latest chapter in a story that began billions of years ago on another world, continued through the arrival of microorganisms on the young Earth, progressed through eons of evolution, and has now reached the point where the descendants have achieved intelligence and are asking questions about their origins. What comes next? Do we make contact with other seeded worlds? Do we find evidence of the Cedars or their successors? Do we ourselves become Cedars, carrying the gift forward to other young planets? Or does the story end with us if we destroy ourselves through war, environmental collapse, or simple failure to expand beyond Earth before some cosmic catastrophe strikes? The hypothesis suggests we're part of something larger, but it doesn't guarantee success. Evolution is full of dead ends, of species that thrived for millions of years and then vanished. Trilobites dominated the oceans for 270 million years, longer than dinosaurs walked the Earth, and then went extinct without descendants. We could be the same, a successful experiment that flourished for a brief moment in cosmic time, and then ended, leaving no trace except what's encoded in other organisms' genomes. Or we could be the breakthrough, the intelligence that survives, spreads, and carries the story forward for billions of years more. The choice, to whatever extent we have choice, is ours. The final wonder. Let me leave you with one last thought, one that applies whether panspermia is true or not. Right now, in your body, there are molecules, proteins, DNA, lipids, that are direct descendants of molecules that existed 4 billion years ago. Not copies of copies of copies, but continuous physical lineages. The DNA in your cells is a direct descendant of DNA in Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Some of your proteins use structures that were refined billions of years ago. You are ancient. You are connected through an unbroken chain of reproduction to the very first organisms on Earth, whether they arrived from space or emerged from terrestrial chemistry. Every cell in your body is operating using molecular machinery that has been tested and refined over incomprehensible spans of time. The ATP molecules powering your muscles right now are using the same chemistry that powered the first complex cells billions of years ago. The genetic code being read in your cells at this very moment is the same code that was read in microorganisms that lived when Earth had no oxygen, no continents as we know them, and no complex life. You are a living fossil, carrying within you the information and mechanisms of the deepest past. But you're also something entirely new, a configuration of matter and energy that has never existed before and will never exist again, asking questions that couldn't be asked until consciousness evolved. Whether you're the product of Earth's own creativity,
or the descendant of an ancient cosmic gift, you're remarkable. Your existence represents billions of years of successful survival, adaptation, and reproduction. You're the universe looking at itself, thinking about itself, wondering about its own origins. And that's true whether the answer to our title question is, the aliens found a promising hell planet and seeded it with life, or there were no aliens, just chemistry, time, and the inherent tendency of matter to organize itself into complexity. Both answers lead to the same conclusion. You're part of something vast, ancient, and ongoing. You're a link in a chain that stretches from the deep past into an unknown future. And what you do with your brief moment of consciousness, how you treat other life, what you create, what knowledge you pass on, how you engage with the mystery of existence, matters. The open question. So, what did the aliens find when they arrived 4 billion years ago? If they arrived at all, they found a world of potential, a hellish, violent, chemically rich environment where the seeds of life could take root and flourish. They found a world that, with the right nudge, could transform from a barren rock into a garden of unimaginable diversity. Or perhaps they never arrived at all, and the only seeding was the natural delivery of organic compounds via meteorites and comets, combined with Earth's own chemical creativity. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The questions remain open. The search continues. And in a way, that's perfect. The greatest mysteries should remain mysterious, at least for a while, giving us something to reach for, something to wonder about, something to drive our curiosity and our exploration. Maybe someday we'll know for certain. Maybe we'll find the probe on the moon, or decode the message in our DNA, or make contact with other intelligences descended from the same ancient seeds. Or maybe we'll conclusively prove that life arose naturally on Earth through well-understood chemical processes, and the mystery will be replaced by detailed understanding of exactly how chemistry became biology. Either way, the search itself is worthwhile, because in seeking to understand our origins, we're doing what life has always done: exploring, adapting, reaching beyond our current limits to understand more, to be more, to ensure that the flame of consciousness continues burning for as long as possible. Whether we're the gift or the accident, we're here. We're alive. We're thinking, wondering, searching. And that, ultimately, is what matters most. The story continues, and you're part of it. Epilogue. The Search Tomorrow. 1,200 words. The sun is setting on another day, another rotation of the planet Earth. Somewhere in orbit above us, telescopes are scanning distant stars, searching for the telltale chemical signatures of life on exoplanets. In laboratories around the world, scientists are sequencing genomes, comparing the genetic code of organisms separated by billions of years of evolution, looking for clues to our deepest origins. On Mars, rovers are drilling into ancient rocks, collecting samples that might, just might, contain fossils of microorganisms that lived when the red planet had liquid water on its surface. Those samples will eventually return to Earth, where they'll be analyzed with instruments sensitive enough to detect a few atoms of organic material, looking for signs of life that shares our biochemistry or reveals something entirely different.
In the darkness of space, SETI installations listen to the cosmos, sorting through radio signals for patterns that couldn't arise naturally, searching for messages from intelligences that might share our origins, or represent something entirely alien. And in universities, research institutes, and even home offices, scientists and amateur researchers alike are pondering the questions we've explored today. Where did we come from? Are we alone? What does our origin story mean for our future? The next generation of evidence. The search for evidence of panspermia is entering an exciting new phase. Technologies that didn't exist even a decade ago are now giving us unprecedented capabilities to investigate life's origins. CRISPR and other genetic engineering tools are allowing us to manipulate and test ancient genes, reconstructing ancestral proteins and seeing how they functioned billions of years ago. We can bring molecules back from the dead, studying their properties and asking whether they show signs of optimization for conditions that didn't exist on early Earth. Advanced mass spectrometry can detect vanishingly small amounts of organic compounds and determine their isotopic composition with incredible precision. This allows us to analyze the oldest rocks on Earth, meteorites, and eventually samples from Mars and other worlds, looking for chemical signatures that would reveal their origins. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are being applied to genomic data, searching for patterns that human researchers might miss.
These algorithms can analyze millions of genes across thousands of organisms, looking for the subtle signatures of common ancestry or anomalous features that don't fit standard evolutionary models. And our space exploration capabilities continue to advance. The James Webb Space Telescope is analyzing the atmospheres of exoplanets. Future missions will cache samples from Mars and return them to Earth. Proposals exist for missions to Europa and Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn that have subsurface oceans that might harbor life. Each of these technologies and missions brings us closer to answering the fundamental question: did life begin on Earth, or did it come from elsewhere? The expanding circle of questions. But as we search for answers to this question, we're discovering that it's connected to even deeper mysteries. What is life, fundamentally? We think we know. It's self-replicating chemistry that can evolve through natural selection. But recent discoveries of chemical systems that show lifelike properties blur the boundaries. At what point does complex chemistry become simple life? And could there be forms of life based on entirely different chemistry than ours? How common is life in the universe? The answer depends critically on how life originates. If it requires incredible luck, the right chemicals in the right place under the right conditions for millions of years, then life might be extraordinarily rare. But if life can be seeded, if it can travel between worlds, if the building blocks are ubiquitous in space, then life might be everywhere.
Are we typical or unusual? If we ever find life elsewhere, will it be similar to us? Carbon-based, water-dependent, using DNA or something like it? Or will it be so different that we barely recognize it as life? And what would that tell us about our own origins? What is our responsibility to other life, whether on Earth or elsewhere? If we find microorganisms on Mars, do we protect them from contamination by Earth life, even if that makes Mars harder for us to explore? If we terraform Mars, killing any indigenous life in the process,
Is that genocide or development? And if we have the capability to seed lifeless worlds, should we? The personal connection. These might seem like abstract questions, fit only for scientists and philosophers to debate. But they're deeply personal, touching on how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. If you're descended from organisms that came from another world, does that change how you see yourself? You're still human, still shaped by millions of years of evolution on Earth, still deeply connected to this planet's history and ecology. But there's an added dimension. You're also carrying forward a legacy that transcends Earth, that connects you to cosmic processes, and possibly to other worlds you'll never see. Or, if you're purely terrestrial, the product of Earth's own chemical creativity, does that make you more or less special? More, perhaps. You're a completely original creation, not a copy or modification of something that existed elsewhere. You're what happens when a planet creates consciousness from scratch. Either way, you're remarkable. And either way, you have a role to play in the next chapter of the story. The story will tell. Generations from now, humans, or our descendants, whatever they may be, will look back on our era as the time when we first seriously grappled with these questions.
We're living in the moment when panspermia transitions from speculation to testable hypothesis, when we're developing the tools to finally investigate whether life began here or came from elsewhere. What will they learn? What will the evidence show? I don't know. Nobody does. And that's what makes this moment so exciting. But I do know this. Whether we find evidence of ancient seeding or proof of terrestrial origins, the search itself will have been worthwhile. We're learning how to read the genetic code, how to analyze ancient rocks, how to search for life on other worlds. We're expanding our understanding of what's possible, what's probable, and what's true. And in the process, we're becoming the kind of species that could, if we choose, become seeders ourselves someday. We're developing the knowledge, the technology, and hopefully the wisdom to spread life beyond Earth, to protect it, to nurture it, to ensure that the flame of consciousness continues burning no matter what happens to our home planet. The last word. If there were aliens who seeded Earth 4 billion years ago, they're not here to answer our questions. We have to find the answers ourselves, through careful observation, rigorous experimentation, and honest reasoning. But in a sense, they did leave us a message. Not encoded in DNA or hidden in lunar artifacts, but written in the very fact of our existence. The message is simple. Life is possible. Intelligence is possible. The universe is capable of creating beings who can wonder about their origins, who can search for truth, who can imagine possibilities beyond their immediate experience. Whether that message was deliberately sent by ancient seeders or emerged naturally from the cosmos, it's the same message. And our job is to continue it, to survive, to thrive, to explore, to understand, and eventually to carry life forward to places it's never been. The story began billions of years ago, in circumstances we're only beginning to understand. But the story isn't over. You're part of it. And what happens next depends, in part, on you. So look up at the stars tonight. Wonder. Question. Search. The universe has secrets to reveal, and we're the ones asking the questions.